Thanks everyone for joining. We'll just give everybody a couple minutes to get settled in their seats. I should introduce myself. My name is Paige. I've worked at the AISC now for about 5 years. My work anniversary came up on LinkedIn yesterday, which is hilarious. It's been, I guess time flies when you're having fun, right? I usually work on communications and outreach in the winter and running our biocontrol program in the summers. A lot of different projects that we work on, but this year I've been managing the grant that we received from the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership, or SCAP, to launch a new campaign promoting Alberta's 70-year rat-free status. So making sure that Albertans kind of know those signs of rats present and the differences between similar species. This campaign is called Rat on Rats, and we launched that in November of last year. So, of course, this is related to that. The workshop today will be addressing and identifying, managing, and preventing those common pests, including rodents, insects, and skunks, especially in urban dwelling areas, hence Pests in the City. So we had planned to host this workshop for structural pesticide applicators in conjunction with that launch of the new campaign. And so here we are. When organizing it and trying to connect with all the structural applicators, we knew we had to talk to the Alberta Pest Management Association. So Samir and Nick are here. They've been great in reaching this audience, and they wanted to say a few words. So we have Samir, who is the current president of the APMA and the incoming president at the Canadian Pest Management Association. And then Nick is the current APMA board member and past president. So if you guys want to take it away, feel free.
Yeah, thank you, Paige. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning to allow Nick and I to share a few words this morning. As mentioned, I'm Samir, and I'm the current president of the Alberta Pest Management Association and the incoming president of the Canadian Pest Management Association. It's been an honor to kind of partner with this group in terms of the work that we're doing as part of one of our objectives of the association, which is always to promote and educate our applicators, but as well as just look at the trends of the future as well as other trends that have we can build on from the past. And so this particular session, in terms of hearing legendary speakers like Dr. Bobby Corrigan, for those guys that are on this call and have not heard Dr. Bobby, I think you're in for a treat today. And I really truly appreciate the partnership that we've had as the association with, the Invasive Species Council, the Rat Control Program in Alberta, the Alberta Environment and Parks. Like this, the partnership has been great, and we really want to extend our thank you for having us this morning and allowing a number of our structural applicators to be a part of this. I am looking at the attendee list, and I see a lot of us here today. So I really appreciate that opportunity. I did want to just kind of mention one thing that we also do a lot of partnership work and have a lot of conferences that we put together. And we hope that all of us kind of participate today, participate in our pest management conference coming up here at the end of the month in Calgary, and also work together for the future to make sure that we remain empowered in the power of education. Because we strongly believe that's the only way to continue to work together and control pests. And it's not just about the day-to-day stuff we do with pesticides and rodenticides, but how do we think about other creative ways to work with pests and other kind of methodologies, considering also kind of what's happening in the environment out there around rodenticides and the use of rodenticides and a few other things that are all out there. So that's kind of what I wanted to share. I want to thank again the team here for inviting us, and I'll hand it over to Nick.
Thanks, Nick. There's not much else to say after all that. But Paige, congratulations on putting together a fabulous event. Bobby, thank you very much for your time. For those who haven't listened to Bobby, you're in for a real treat. I think that in the decades to come, it's going to be very challenging for Alberta to keep the rat-free status that we've worked so hard to achieve and to maintain. But under the regulatory conditions, in the decades to come, we're going to have to think out of the box. We're going to have to do things differently. And to Samir's point, it all begins with education. So let's get into it. Thanks, Paige.
We'll get started here. I hope that the volume is louder. I'll hold it up to my mouth here. But Bobby has gotten already quite the introduction here. Bobby has been active in the science of urban rodentology for over 30 years, starting as a pest control technician, running a route in New York City for 3 years full time while saving for college. After graduate school, Bobby taught classes on urban rodentology and conducted rodent research at Purdue University for 16 years. So he has received multiple prestigious awards, including the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, several American universities, and the City of New York's Distinguished Scientist Award for his innovations and advancements in rat management for New York City. So without further ado, Bobby, could you please take it away? I will stop sharing my screen here.
Okay, we good with AV?
Looks good.
Okay, thanks, Paige, and hello to everybody in Alberta and beyond. Today I have an assignment, if you will, to talk about the essential elements of maintaining rat-free cities, towns, and farms. In particular, you all in Alberta are familiar with the rat-free term and the rat-free concept. And I can tell you, I can say as a rodentologist, every place I go, when I start engaging with people, no matter where it is, they say, well, why don't we do what Alberta does? How did Alberta get to be rat-free? Right? So that identity, that tag on Alberta is tremendous. And I'd like to say kudos to everybody in Alberta for, making sure that you try to achieve that and sustain it, as Nick just said. We're going to talk about what the future looks like because we are on a global scale experiencing a rat explosion. And I'll show you that in a second. But before I start, I want to say thanks for having me here. It is an honor. I've been out to Alberta a couple of times over the years and throughout Canada quite a bit. Canada, to some degree, is my recreational playland. I just love the country from all the way from the east in Nova Scotia all the way back to British Columbia. So it's an honor to be here. Also, thanks to Karen, Megan, Paige, behind the scenes. There's always a lot of work that goes into these things, and it ends up being, a workshop or a seminar or a meeting. And behind all those details and speakers and learning and education and so forth, it's hard work. So thanks, you guys, and thanks, Paige, for making all the technical aspects of this very smooth. So this is coming to you from New York City. This is where I am right now. Right, this is where I have an office. This is where I spend my time. My wife and I live outside the city of New York, up along the Hudson River. But we are definitely, and I think everybody knows, and it's no secret, New York City is one of the most rat-afflicted cities in the world. And, it doesn't really matter and it has no purpose. Sometimes you'll see advertisements that say, who's number one with the most rats in the United States or in Canada and so forth. Those questions, they really would be very difficult to say someone has the number one spot, or the number 6 spot or something. I mean, this isn't the Super Bowl, as if we should be proud of like, hey, we're number one in New York rats or whatever it is. So I use the term afflicted, right? Meaning a city that has any particular problem, conundrum, homelessness, crime, rats, what have you, it's an affliction. So for sure, we are an afflicted city. But I'd like to point out we're one of the earliest cities on the East Coast in the United States, along with Boston, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Portland. And we had thousands upon thousands of ships coming in upon us during the 1600s and 1700s from Europe and parts all over the world. So we received rats on a regular basis, quite frankly, and we're a very old city, right? So this is not about why we have a lot of rats in New York. I'll show some of those pictures also this morning, but it's apples to oranges sometimes when someone says, Well, why doesn't New York City do something, like some other city, whether it's Alberta, and Calgary, or whether it's San Francisco or so forth, with science and with animals? It's very difficult to say this is standard because it is not, right? But nevertheless, you know, here we are. And for those of you who've been to New York, have never been to New York, it's a case of it is really truly a tremendous city. Everybody, we have so many people, and is because it's the Big Apple. People have all kinds of myths and misconceptions and what have you. But it's this is Manhattan, and this is before the Freedom Tower, as you can see, right dead center there with the windows still going in. My office is actually right across the street from that. And I work a lot throughout New York City, all five boroughs and this kind of thing. Manhattan, as you see right there, including the park down on the lower left, that's Battery Park. This is about where the rats arrived in our city back in the early 1700s, right about there. If we jump to the future with the Freedom Tower that you see, I can tell you personally, because I was involved, the rats were in those upper floors before the people were, right? Just showing, as I'm going to point out, what an incredible mammal this is for adaptation and taking advantage of anything they can take advantage of to get established. So it's a constant battle. And our point this morning is to remind everybody, whether it's Alberta or Calgary or Edmonton or any of the rural farms of Alberta, is we can never let our guards down on this mammal. It is among the most successful mammals on planet Earth. The house mouse is number 2, by the way. Humans are number 1, the house mouse number 2, probably the Noy rat's number 3, but So this is old time Manhattan when we stand it up and look at it and where you just were with that photograph. So all the way down at the bottom of my slide here, if you can see my cursor, that's where we just were, Low Manhattan. This area up here at the time this map was made was old farmland. And right now this is Upper Manhattan. And we have the Hudson on our left. We have the East River on the right, Manhattan Island. And so, I always love this map because it's a map of the underground streams below wall of cement. And I have a personal theory just from doing a lot of data analysis that those underground streams and the rat complaints are directly related. If you turn that map on its side, I don't know about you all, but that to me looks like the outline of a rat. So I don't know, maybe the rats chewed it out like that over time. I don't know, but we are definitely a rat-afflicted city. To that point, I will show you that this is New York City. This is New York City. We call them catch basins. This is where the water runs off. I'm sure it's the same in the Alberta cities where you have to have drain runoffs and what have you. And this leads into our New York City sewers out in the middle of the street. And let's just take a look. This is about 3 p.m. in the afternoon. Let's watch this for a second. Look to the right. And it's kind of like, I think we're all familiar with whack-a-mole, right? Whack-a-mole. And so this is just one family of rats with the mom. The mom's going to poke her head back up right there. There's mom. And there's all her offspring and a family unit. Notice they're all looking to the right. Their noses are all sniffing. There's the hungriest of the young ones coming out like, and what are they waiting for? Fresh food to come out in bags. Even on the streets itself, here we have this in New York City street, the broad daylight, and we're gonna stomp our foot for this rat, get it moving. Broad daylight, boom, disappears to its rat world below the sidewalks. So we are definitely rat afflicted. I'm sure, again, with Alberta, we don't quite have that in Alberta. That's a little bit strange, like a different planet. I'm sure you're thinking like that. But notice the bags of garbage, right? about 22 feet away, right here from the emergence of the rats that come out of here. And within about 20 minutes at night after dusk on this particular street, there is rats foraging all over the curb. Why? Because of this, right? Which we'll talk about. But, rats are mammals. They must have food. And when they have plenty of food that's there every single dependable night, of course, there's lots of protein and there's going to be lots of rats. So this is kind of my life. As you heard perhaps in the introduction, I've been at this a long time. Pest control has been my life, my career. I absolutely love it. I'm passionate about it. My first week on the job when I was an exterminator, and that's what we call ourselves in New York City, I was put into the sewers because the new guy gets the job, right? And I was down in the sewers putting out baits and poisons for rats in New York City sewers. Now these days, I do a lot of rat surveys. Actually, on a global scale, I travel around the world doing rat surveys. And I've been to Canada doing rat surveys as an example. But this is what it's about. And for every pest professional attending today, I bet you're nodding your head like, yep, that is what it's about. Especially with German cockroaches and sloppy restaurants or rats and mice and cluttered apartments and so forth and so on. But it is particularly with rats and keeping Alberta rat free, we have to focus, of course, like manage the refuse, you manage the rats. Sometimes the refuse isn't exactly as we'll talk about with farms, livestock farms of Alberta. There's going to be grain every place. You can't say, well, throw out the grain, right? So it's a case, but where there's food, if there's rats around, you'll notice pieces of pizza here. We're very famous for what's called pizza rat. But I could show you bagel rat, I could show you coffee rat, I could show you, sandwich rat. But so pizza rat hits, Here's a dumpster in the back of a bunch of restaurants, which I'm going to talk about. If we pay attention to this dumpster in an alleyway of the city, whether it be your cities or our cities, the rats get it done. Now, everybody thought, well, there's no way the rats can get all the way up into that dumpster. And notice, by the way, it was probably very quick, but over here, there's a bait box. Sometimes the pest professional put out a bait box saying, well, we want to protect that doorway from the rats. We'll put out a bait station. Well, a bait station competing against a garbage can or a dumpster where there's food where they can access and they learn to do it will be totally ignored. It's not about that the baits don't taste as good as the food. Is that once the rats have something like that they just learned is well, we don't change what's working for us. So that's a big piece of food in the rat's mouth. It's gymnastics coming up and down. That rat has no intention of doing anything but getting back to its nest, as you see right here, and how quickly it disappears just like the other rat. So again, I do want to stress, because people think, well, that's New York City, for example. Well, this is just a couple of months ago when I was in Paris. This is off the Champs-Élysées in Paris, the most famous avenue in Paris. And, nearby here, the rats in these bushes. So it's about environment, everybody. It's not about putting out a bait or a box or a trap and fixing the rats of a city with tools. We need those tools. But if we don't do this, or we don't do what you just saw, with the bags of garbage on the sidewalk, there will be no rats. Now, again, I'm willing to bet everybody attending today is like, yeah, no kidding, Bobby. We say that all the time, day in, day out. Everybody says that. The public is the problem. And we can and do constantly talk to customers and superintendents and building managers and store grocers and say, look, I can help you, but I cannot help you very much if you don't work with me on this principle. So I took this picture in the middle of the night, literally, I actually followed this rat for blocks. I chased along right behind it, taking pictures, trying to figure out, okay, where's it going to go? It kept going for blocks, and I hung with it, which was a lot of fun, to be honest with you. If you're a rodentologist, I'm thinking, this is kind of cool. Where's he going to go? My friends were waiting for me at a local pub to have a pint of Guinness, and I didn't show up. I did this instead, but this animal was smelling each bag and making a selection as to which bag had the mood for this animal's nutrition, just like us. Hey, you mood for chicken today? You mood for meatloaf? What do you want? Fish? These animals do the same thing, nutritional balance. But it's a gorgeous, gorgeous mammal. It's a gorgeous example of the animal kingdom. A couple of years ago, National Geographic, they did a special on cities. Now, it's not about rats per se, but it was a beautiful special edition on what do cities look like? Ideas for a brighter future. Of course, this fits the whole world. Edmonton, Calgary, all the cities throughout Canada, all the cities throughout US and Europe and so forth. But notice, down in the bottom here, they included rats. They'll always be with us. So they came to New York City, and I hung out with the writers and the photographers and what have you. And it was a big project to do that. For that one story, a lot goes into these National Geographics. But National Geographic did that because of the message. Rats are very well distributed around the world now. Recently we just hosted the first ever National Urban Rodent Summit to strategize in war on rats. That's what it's come to. So it's, in this case, it went national, but then Germany's, they had the European Rat Summit, which is all of us met in Germany, all of us met here. We're still doing this. We're even putting together a society on urban rodentology, so forth and so on. We had our academy a couple of months ago in New York City. This is where we held our academy. Right here, it's right on the Hudson River. Here's the Freedom Tower finished. And this particular slide, again, beautiful. It's a beautiful spot, to hang out and have lunch. And there's a park up top and this kind of thing. We host every year, twice a year, the New York City Rat Academy. It's like a boot camp. And in fact, we were lucky enough, there's Karen Wickerson, who spoke at our academy just this last semester, right? And gave a great talk on what does it take to keep Alberta rat-free. And we're all so hungry. We said, if you could come out and just talk to us of how you guys do it. What do you see? How is it planned? What are all the teams in Alberta working together? And so, it was just fantastic. And thank you, Karen, for coming to the Big Apple, all the way to the Big Apple to do that. I'm going to come back to this a little bit later. So here's our rat. This is not a biology session. We're not talking about reproduction, and we're not going to talk about litters and how fast they grow or anything like that. Everybody attending here, I would assume, or most of us, the rat of Alberta and areas from even an occasional visit or a presence that they may make. Again, for us, I use this particular image because this is real. This is a real wild rat, not a laboratory rat and what have you. There's no such thing as a 2-pound rat. They're never going to get that big and so forth, despite all the myths. But this is the typical deal. Now, it is important for us to stress here of its success, right? So because this animal, even though we call it the Norway rat, it's not from Norway, it's from Mongolia, northern China. And it from the open fields of Mongolia now to, sorry for the spelling, that's planet Earth. Planet Earth. It's pretty much everywhere, right? It may be in fewer numbers in some areas and what have you, and due to the, proactive stance and alertness of countries like Alberta and so forth. But in general, this is a very impressive mammal, as I said earlier. Now, if we break this down, there is a recipe for countrywide trouble, as I call it, right? It's the United States relative to rats, we're in trouble, right? But we're not the only ones. Europeans are in trouble, Asia's in trouble. I travel all around the world and they're like, we need help with the rodents. And further east from yourselves and further west, East Vancouver, I've been to East Vancouver several times, that's trouble with rats. You go back to, the eastern sector, I've been to Toronto and Ottawa, and, these are areas where rats are trouble. So what we need to just note that recipe. It's a recipe for invasion. And this is why Alberta, no matter where you are right now, as you know, as it was said earlier, you just can't afford to sit back and say, we're in pretty good shape. So let's not give it a lot of attention. You can't. You have to stay very, very alert to match this animal. It's highly secretive. It is truly, believe it or not, diabolically clever. And that's been proven with really good science. It's a superb stowaway, on the ships, the planes, trucks, and the trains of modern day. It has a behavior called hugger-muggering. That is, you can fit a whole family, that the ones you saw in the sewer, for example, you can fit that entire family inside a basketball. They get tight, they get really close to each other, they twist their bodies, they hugger-mugger into a ball, and you put them underground in some space the size of a basketball, and they're not going to complain. They're not on our daily schedules. And this is where they've taken advantage of us, just like the mouse has done the same thing. Is most people, they get up in the morning and they're thinking about, what's my day like? Oh my goodness, it's busy. I've got 4 meetings, or I have this to do today, and so I've got 10 stops on my route. The last kind of thing we stop and say, yeah, but what about rats, mice, bedbugs, cockroaches, ants, and so forth? Pests are the last thing most people in the public think about. They have very fast reproduction as long as they have food and nests that combine. Right? The average rat, they go anywhere from 1 ounce to 3 ounces, and I'm using the metric system right here in American system measurements. But as long as they can get that food on a regular basis and a place to, just like you and I, rest and hide, that reproduction is going to go very quickly. And the months go by while we're being busy, and boom, before you know, it's like, why didn't you call me earlier? Why didn't somebody say something about this? When you had 1 rat that was pregnant, now you have 62. And now we're up against something. There's not enough attention by us and time and money to get 96% replenishment level. Most people, if they do develop a rodent problem, they'll say, how much for a monthly service? What's going to be the bill? All the pest professionals here can relate. And if you're a sales professional in pest management, can relate. People are thinking, hey, don't charge me a lot of money. There's other companies in the yellow pages I can call if you do. But the fact of the matter is, with rats and mice, population biology 101, very well defined, is if you go in on an infestation, if you really want to have impact so it cannot rebound, you have to get rid of 96% of those animals. Now, that's not easy unless it's 2 mice in a garage of suburbia, and you go in and you're able to put out several, and maybe 24 traps. That's what I would do, and take out those mice right there and then. But once the rats get established, say in a block in a city or in the back of some grocery store or something, and the numbers are multiplying, you've got your work cut out for you. So again, over years, humans just said, look, okay, we saw some rats, we saw some mice, get an exterminator, tell them to exterminate, but I don't want to spend a lot of money on this. Keep that in mind, they'll say. So this is how it began. This is how it continues. I was just in New Orleans last week, and there was something like a $80 million yacht tied up to the mooring dock in New Orleans, and there was not a single thing on the ropes to prevent the rats from getting onto that yacht. And there were rats right at the shoreline where the yacht was tied up. Thinking this is going to be interesting when they have their parties out on the ocean. Very secretive. My life has been this, doing surveys, going out, going into alleyways that, they're very typical like this, and this happens to be a clean one, doesn't it? If you're familiar with alleys and so forth in the middle of the night, but there's dumpsters. And those dumpsters have to be very good dumpsters. And there's garbage cans on the right. It has to be a very good garbage can. All those doors have to be rodent-proofed, not weather stripped. Because you're up against this diabolically clever animal. This is from the National Geographic night. We're out taking pictures with the very famous Charlie Hamilton James photographer. He's won so many awards for his wildlife photography. And this is real. It's not staged. We didn't stage this or anything like that. But once again, we have pizza rat. The guy down in the bottom was looking like, hey, you know what? I'm standing guard. So if you have a problem, you're gonna have to go through me to get to these other guys. But litter baskets, how a city does litter baskets, which litter basket models they use, where do they place them, what time of the 24-hour cycle are they collected? All of that litter basket dynamic must be critically factored into rat prevention. Sometimes, the rat's clever, right? Very clever. This rat's like, okay, this ain't working anymore from here. But this rat learned through cleverness and intelligence to work up the seam here, all the way to the top, put his toes in here and just stretch out and boom, in, no problem. But it took a couple tries, just like with us. And this is more Charlie's work in the middle of the night. This won the National Wildlife Photography Award of the year, this particular photograph you're looking at. These are mom and pop rats in New York City coming back from foraging around all over their faces. They're smeared chicken and grease and this kind of thing, teaching the young, here's the young, that that's food. Mom and dad's face is what I need to go looking for myself now. And so it's a transfer of knowledge, if you will, of what food is and where it is. They will tell them where it is by leaving droppings all the way to the source. They get into ceilings. I took this picture, believe it or not, in the ceiling of a hospital, and a rat fell through the ceiling down onto a patient's bed. That didn't go very well, and so we established a massive trapping program. Come back and show you how clever rats are. After learning that the traps can be dangerous, there's a trap set right here. And what rats will often do these days is they will take a pencil or they'll take a piece of stick, or in this case, they're going to use a wire. They will set off these traps and then take the bait. So let's watch this rat try that. Notice it's not interacting with the trap. It's going to grab some wires nearby and try pulling the wires over to set the trap off. This is real. This isn't a real ceiling. This is the real deal. They've been doing this for a long time, but we always thought, well, something got away from my traps. They set it off and got away. Well, now with cams, we can tell maybe that's been going on forever. We've been looking at the wrong way on this. Here's a restaurant. Where are they going? In the ceiling. How long do we have to wait? Now, I have to tell you, that restaurant was open for business. Okay. And so, that's in the ceiling of a restaurant serving food. Now, someone might even say, well, okay, Bobby, but they're in the ceiling, for goodness sakes. That particulate matter, the particulate matter of fleas and lice and mites and skin and pieces and parts of excrement and urine is filtering down into that kitchen every single day. So when we have rodents invade buildings, it's a big deal. It's a big deal to prevent that as strong as you can, like Alberta's doing, right? Because once that's in there, people say, well, just put out a couple of traps and bait stations is never going to get anywhere near close to controlling that situation that you just saw. That's going to be intensive trapping and training the rats to interact with the traps and take them out and clean that ceiling and so forth. It's going to be expensive. Now, let's get back to the stowaway business. If you're a country and you're trying to, like Alberta, Karen in New York City talked all about the borders and what you guys do and the prevention and so forth, and it's really impressive. And so, but they get on trucks and they get on airplanes, they get on trains. Nobody's going to stop with their hands, say, stop this train. We're coming out of the countryside of Alberta. We want to inspect it, every single one. Or we have to ask, well, how many boxes arrive from somewhere now that it's global trade on a monthly basis to everyday living places like distribution centers or a big giant shopping mall outside of Edmonton or something like this, or outside of New York or any place, and to our eaters? The answer is, millions in some cases, millions of boxes, which we can as humans open up every single box and see if there's a baby rat or a mother rat inside a box, or a mouse or cockroaches or what have you. Pests are great stowaways. So this is where we are, truly, right? And I'm not trying to be glib here or exaggerate the point. Is we just published a paper, as I'll show you, where we show that the rats are definitely increasing around the world. This was just last week, not even a week ago. It was released. It was embargoed. We published, as a team of us in Science magazines, and Jonathan Richardson is the main author. There was actually 19 of us involved in this paper and what have you. But we were able to statistically show increasing rat numbers in cities are linked to climate warming. It's a big deal. Increasing human populations and urbanization. It's a trifecta. It's not just one thing or the other. But climate warming is definitely involved in this as a piece of that trifecta. And the reason for that is rats, when it's super cold, winter after winter, they don't reproduce during cold winters. They shut it down. But we just had the warmest decade in North America in history, one after the other, 10 years of it. Enough so that the rats can say, you know what, the winter isn't quite as bad as it used to be, so maybe I can have one more litter. Just eke out one more litter, or even if they could do at half a litter, eke out a half a litter. When you put the logarithmic growth of their reproductive rate into all the rats eking out just a half a litter, you end up with hundreds of millions of rats. So we know in cities, for example, our world, for cities that are rat afflicted especially, they're in our sewers, their parks, our alleys, they're in basements, ceilings, walls. They're in substreet utility systems, which are enormous in pipes. Everybody tends to focus on the sewers, but what's below our feet in our streets and our sidewalks of every city? Pipes and wires of all different kinds. Of course, subway systems, waterfronts, and so forth. This is their world. This is where the rat disappeared to when I started off this morning. You saw that rat run across the sidewalk and drop down to a crack in the sidewalk. Down below is that. And how many rat families can you fit into that? It's staggering. But one thing we can do is say, well, those rats down there in that rat world have to have food every 24 hours, just like us. And that we can control. Right? So again, you guys, you get all this great press and tremendous attention on this. So actually, in some ways, the whole world's watching Alberta in this regard. Right? And so, but the key point, especially as Nicholas, just a minute ago, emphasized that one word: stay. Stay, right? Sustainable, right? So big space, right? Of course, giant space, in Canada, and especially with your two major cities, which we were talking about, just a little bit ago when I was mentioning I've been to both cities, and, Paige had said, well, they're very similar in many ways. They are indeed. They are indeed, and so, but you have your borders with lots, as I'm going to mention, lots of rural areas, lots of farms, even within and right on the outskirts of your cities, and both cities, lots of farms and livestock and so forth. You're not very far from us where, Seattle, one of our major rat afflicted cities. So, there's trains, planes, and automobiles doing this. Right? So it's in Alberta, you have the same thing. You have a critical word, grain. We knew that the rodents travel from Mongolia all the way around the world first, on the Silk Road, in the backs of mules and wagons on wheels and horses and so forth. Well, our 21st century Silk Road is, we could call it the grain road, right? The grain, where do the trucks go? Where do the planes go? Where do the rails go? So forth and so on. So all these areas, this is what we're up against, including in Alberta. No difference. So we have, let me get some water. Excuse me. So we have in all cities what we refer to as rat vulnerable areas, right? As a scientist that does this and surveys cities, right away I'm like, okay, I need to identify my rat vulnerable areas of my city. But, the big picture in city zones first, of course, we have giant distribution centers now today. It's those buildings you drive by on the highways, and all of a sudden there's a monster-sized, gigantic building off the highway, all by itself, not surrounded by anything, and 100 trucks pulling up the shipping receiving doors all around it. Distribution center. I've worked in those where it's 1.5 million square feet. You need a golf cart to do that. Large shopping centers, whether it's a center or a mall or whatever it may be, any place where people gather and there's lots of things and boxes and storage and food and so forth. That's something we need to watch. Food serving clusters in cities, and of course rivers and parks. So if we look at Calgary, I did this on a Google map just the other day, getting ready to think about what we're going to chat about. But a lot of times I follow my dots. Just push, restaurants and wherever, downtown Calgary or downtown New York. You just push the restaurant thing. And that's important because the distribution and density of the food locations is an area I have to believe rodents are constantly, if they do come in with, quote, a box from someplace or on a trailer from someplace, and something gets delivered, food molecules, of course, they're experts at detecting where are they the strongest, where are they constantly available, and so forth. And you'll notice, of course, both cities, but right here, whenever you have riverways, the Norway rat has another name called the river rat. It also has the name the sewer rat and the barn rat. But sometimes when I'm saying, well, what are the complaint levels from these areas? Are there any complaints? It would be great if constantly you do an overlay with data and say, you know what? We're not getting complaints from those areas. That's probably a good testimony that there's a culture in that city, Alberta or any place, Barcelona not too long ago is like, holy cow, is this a clean city? Right? So, but it's important for us to be cognizant of relationships, of geographics, what the land has, like the rivers and the forests and the parks and what have you, and what we have as people in our food and distribution, storage, and commerce and so forth. You begin to get close and you start, zeroing in. And, again, you look at the whole picture. And so you have supermarkets, you have Home Depots, and all of the things that are now globally, right? You have big hospitals, you have a mall, you have the West Edmonton Mall, one of the largest malls, if not, I don't know, the largest mall in Canada, perhaps. It's giant, right? And I do a lot of work with malls around the country, and it's just every day the boxes come, the people come, the food goes in every single direction. And if they're established, you end up with the word chronic. Because chronic, as I mentioned earlier, is a situation of, you take care of them in one spot, and all of a sudden you get more complaints from another spot. And notice how everything here within a city, your city, my city, any city, it's linked. This is called open populations. So let's just say rats in the subway system start to get overpopulated. They will spread out and end up in the lots above, vacant lots. And there's trash and vegetation and vacant lots, and that's got to be kept on there. Or highway embankments where that's getting crowded, they can end up through here, back to here. Everybody is connected, open population. And this is like the whack-a-mole thing. So when we're trying to be sustainable rat-free, this whole thing has at least got to be on the radar in some form or fashion of sampling. In agriculture, you're a very agriculturally oriented province, of course, and Alberta, very famous for things like your pig farms and your poultry farms and all the crops that you export and you use and everything. Very, very famous, very well done. So you have the, if rats could talk to us and say, of course we love pig farms and poultry farms. And we certainly are grain eaters in Mongolia. That's what we are hardwired for. So any granaries and distribution centers of massive granaries. And then we even have highways. Even without your highways, we have our highways. And if we look at, a typical agricultural situation, and my PhD, I spent a lot of time in poultry farms, doing rats and mice designs because they're so challenging if they get a foothold. The key is never to let them get onto first base in these environments, never. And so, it's a case of, well, we have all this grain. Of course, you're going to have spillage. And we can say it must be exactly clean every single day, every spit of grain. You'll never have a break of a valve here, and you'll never be able to spill anything while you're feeding the animals. That's not realistic. So farms are particularly vulnerable. Now, if we take an aerial view, this is of your province. I just, again, grabbed it right off of Google, went out into the country where you have some of your farms or what have you. But what I want to point out here, sometimes one farm will get an infestation of rats. And 3 months later, this farm will say, how'd this happen? How'd we get rats? Did it come from a granary truck? Did it come from a delivery, something like this? Well, right here. Right, that creek and a creek bed. This is their highways through rural areas. And it's even been measured how fast they can do it, right? But rats constantly, even if there's food still here, as they grow in numbers, they start bickering if they get too many numbers for the same barn. So the males will strike out and say, you know what, it's time for me to leave this town or leave this home, just like we do as humans. I'm moving away to a different place. And they follow the creeks and canals and little riverbeds because there's life-sustaining food and water all the way. Until they reach a different spot, this farm, and say, wow, the grain really smells fresh here. I might as well try this for my new home. Hey, it's got a place to hide, it's got the food, boom, new infestation. So as I wrap up here, you guys, it's about that word again, sustainable. If someone wants to be sustainable, rat-free, any place on this earth, right, it comes down to that word, surveillance. Or, as the saying goes, you need to keep an eye on things, which you guys are doing with a very formal program, as I learned from Karen when she was in New York City. So, one of the most important is when Karen said, this is what we're all about here, is we have a place you can report the rats into the government as soon as you're aware of it, as best as we hope you will, right? It's quite an interesting rat you have going there, Karen, but ours do not, I don't know how it is for your Alberta rats, but ours aren't quite that dangerous, but I'd like to see that someday. But canaries in the coal mine, that's what I call them. This is probably your biggest canary, as I just mentioned. To report a rat, go to this spot and do it. And everyone's probably familiar, the canaries in the coal mine that's what the miners depended on years ago they put canaries all through the coal mine. And if they found that there was a canary dead in a particular channel, there's too much gas in that line, right? So canaries in the coal mine, in your case, as we've learned, Alberta government, Karen's program and beyond, you have pest professionals, throughout Canada, some of which are going to be on this program today, with Abel Waco and some others and this kind of thing. In New York City, I just would like to insert there, we've just formed what we call a cooperative program where the pest professionals cooperate with the city of New York. If they see something, it's like, it's not giving up clients. They're just saying, can you work with the city and say, on 34th Street, I just want to point out, you guys may not have scheduled anything there recently, but there's a real rat problem on that street. Now, they're not going to call up and say, hey, the Jones property on 12 Main Street, you need to get there and give them a ticket or something. It's not like that. But you have to have that connection, since the pest professionals are there day in, day out in neighborhoods. They will see things a city government just simply doesn't have the manpower to see, or the person power to see. Proactive surveillance and some kind of a statistical random sampling of those places I just mentioned a little bit ago. You'll never be able to get to all the farms, of course, and never get to all the distribution centers and so forth. But do you have to have some sampling of those places in a random fashion that would give you an insight? Absolutely. And these days, as I mentioned, there's some amazing breakthroughs with technology. We are working very, very deeply with electronic surveillance technology for rats in New York City and other areas. And I'm not with anybody, so I want to make that very, very clear. As a consultant, I'm not on anybody's paycheck. I don't get anything for promoting products. I never have in my 30 years of doing this, right? But I do embrace technology when it comes about after I test it to see, does this have legs? Is this going to go someplace? So there's not a lot of remote sensors for rats, but this is just one area where this is in New York City, right by the bridge, Brooklyn Bridge. And this is every place we have sensors out, very carefully selected places. And I have a full-time technician that is like a traffic person sitting in a traffic control room, monitoring traffic flow and reporting in, right? And those sensors tell me everything I need to know about the rats of only that sector for this particular example here. But I put out my sensors around City Hall. I put them around airports. I put them around wherever I want to put them, quite frankly, to see the population is increasing. Are they stable? Did they decrease after all our work just recently? Blah, blah, blah. And I can get dashboards that look just like this and tell me, are you in the green? Are you headed to the red? It's like this. Sensor technology, remote sensor technology, and equipment sensor technology has changed our whole world of surveillance, proactive surveillance. So we can do this. I'm just staying with Manhattan, but the sensors will tell us, these are your hot zones. You need additional attention and inspections and possible enforcement. This property over here, off the charts, you need to get over there. The sensors were going all week this week there, so forth and so on. Picture how valuable sensors are for incoming ships, making deliveries from countries all around the world, literally. Same here, I've been predicting that I think our future will be Canada, US, Europe, it doesn't matter. There should be a sensor, rodent sensors in the ceilings of every single plane that takes to the air. And the reason for that is rodents, the word rodent means to gnaw, to chew, and they love to chew on wires. I was just on planes all last week. I'm always staring at my ceilings. I do not want a mouse or rat in the ceiling of my plane at any time, nor do you. Of course, subways, we have a big subway system. Rats have shut down subway lines repeatedly by gnawing on wires, electrical boxes, and our whole system is electrical. We depend on a subway. 2 million people a day, 2 million people a day use this system. So I can get my dashboards. This is just one I pulled out we've been doing this a long time now, by the way. And so I can pull out this stands for neighborhood rat reduction. I can tell immediately where we need to go. I can give simple graphs to the mayor's office, and here's a monthly total, Mr. Mayor and Mrs. Mayor, whatever it may be, as to what's going on in your particular area of concern. It stands for Rat Mitigation Zone. And for sure, if you're a farmer, if you have livestock operations, as busy as and intense as it is to run a livestock operation, census take this thing out of like, well, did you get a chance this week to survey with your flashlight every single one of your houses and do that and then respond to that? Is it one mouse that you had in the house here that you saw with your flashlight, or are there 30 mice that you did not see? Census will do that for you. Census will tell you everything that's going on with each house while you sleep. They never get vacation. They never take a day off. They don't get benefits. It's amazing technology. So, and there's all types of, this for a farm, for example. Again, not promoting anybody. It's just, this is who's out there. You can go online yourself and do all kinds of read-ups. But in ending, this is not the way we get out of rat affliction. And this is not the way we prevent rat invasions, right? This is homeowners on Amazon doing their own thing. There's poison in every one of these boxes. Now, in the hands of professionals, rodenticides are very, very critical. In the hands of professionals, they were never intended for the public. But the public purchasing now of rodenticides far exceeds anything the pest industry uses. So, valuable tools. In every one of my textbooks, I'm like, these are very valuable tools. Unfortunately, they've gotten away from them. And all different types, what have you. A great summary of this out of Science magazine, which is a premier place for getting accurate information. This just came out this past. You can put that in the Google search bar and read up. This is not about being against pesticides and trying to prevent professionals from having pesticides. This is serious. This is considerable wildlife impact. I'm very objective about this, having studied the issue for years, as it's not just hawks and owls, it's across the whole biome. Fish and livestock and songbirds and rats and mice and owls and the whole thing. So you can read this and you'll get a very good summary of the issue. Finally, we have an expression, it truly isn't rocket science in principle to prevent rats. The surveillance packages as we saw, we can set those up. But actually, once the rats get set up in a modern day city, like, your Edmonton or your Calgary or my New York, or wherever it is actually more complicated than rocket science to get it fixed. And that's the truth. There's so many factors involved when you try to put together what is going to need to be done now, since they're now established. And it's very expensive for a city, often exceeding any budgets they might have, that we never put that money aside for this. We're having just trouble keeping up with great schools and great roads and all the infrastructures we have to keep up with. There's not that much left over for rats. So we want to try to stay up as best as we can. So I'll say thanks here. And again, I appreciate the honor of you guys inviting me along.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bobby. That was perfect. I love the new term hugger mugger. I'm going to now use that forever and always. We have a couple questions in the chat if you're interested. We have Brenda's asking, does separating organics from other garbage help prevent rats, especially if organics are removed more often?
Great question, Brenda. The answer is yes. We have to be very careful. Some people think composting just by itself can draw rats to a property, but good composting does not. Right? Rats are smart enough to be very careful about their selection of their food, what have you, but you should always separate any of the organic foods and keep them very tightly contained versus, the non-organics. Decaying vegetable leaves and matters and fruits and vegetables that are decaying is not going to sustain a rodent. But, putting some parts and pieces of fish and chicken and beef in a container that's readily accessible will be a real problem. So yes, to your point, pay very close attention how you do your garbage.
Awesome. Okay. We have one from Adam. Good day, Dr. Corrigan. Have you found any particular environment that rats will hesitate to infest? An environment that repels their activity?
Yeah, terrific question also, Adam. So it's hard to find some place that they do not take advantage of. However, that's an animal. They do prefer a lot of close contact around their bodies when they're not out foraging, right? So they don't like the open space where there's no place to hide except a hole in the ground. Even though they can make one, they're too exposed getting to and from that. So in general, they really don't like any wide open areas unless there's nothing left over in those situations. So other than that, we find them in the craziest places. Sometimes in an industrial alley that's spilling, oils and chemicals of all different types and what have you. They'll carve out a niche where they avoid those chemicals and what have you. So nothing too extreme in heat and nothing too extreme in cold. They're similar like that to us. So if during a hot summer day in August in Alberta someplace, if the attic that they were using gets really hot, they'll move out of that. And to that point, is that uncomfortable for them? You better believe it. Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so there are some limits here.
Yes.
We've got Leslie in Edmonton. We have coyotes in urban areas that follow our ravine system. Are coyotes seen as predators for rats?
Yes, Leslie. So in that particular case, coyotes are just, they're very wily, as you know, for sure, very sly animals. And they know that those canals and those ditches and what have you often do have mice and voles and rats and other small mammals that they will definitely, as they're bopping along back and forth, they will take those animals. So will the foxes, they'll take the fox, the fox will take those same animals. So coyote or any animal that's a predator in those areas are going to be very dependent if the rats try to get a foothold. If they catch them moving from farm to farm, they're going to be on that. So that's a perfect case of where biological control really works in that environment.
Awesome. Okay, we had a similar question from Will, so about natural predators, so fox and coyotes. We have Jason. In your experience, is there any value in ultrasonic repellers or similar technology?
Yes, I'll comment. And I also want to add to the last question, there's a whole list of really effective predators when everything's in balance, including the hawks, the owls, and the eagles, right? There's a long list. When everything's in balance, it works. In cities, it's hard. It's much harder for the balance to be maintained. Regarding your question on ultrasonics, they've been around for probably 40, 45 years. And in all that time, there's never been a really solid piece of good science with good statistics in real world applications that show they have practical control. I've seen many, many cases of them installed where people said, well, I'll give it a try and this kind of thing. In laboratories, you can cause rats and mice to avoid the ultrasonic beams, if you will, and they'll run away or they'll turn around in a box and they'll go back, where the ultrasonic beam can't get to them in a laboratory. But in the real world, we've yet to see any scientific publications that they work in the real world.
Okay. From Jordan, we have any evidence of rats only feeding on packaged items. We've seen mice avoid traps and bait piles to feed on packaged items exclusively.
Good observation, Jordan. It's a case of, if there's rats present, however, and they're doing well, if there's no packaged products being penetrated, what have you, someplace those rats are getting their food, for sure. So that would be whether or not the packages are being penetrated or not, and the mice penetrating or not. It's first get to what are all the sources for the rat food and the mouse food, and that's an assessment each time, which is very important for the pest professionals here at this meeting. Is instead of reaching for equipment and putting it out first, the best thing is first assess for the customer whether it's rats or mice, where are the accessible food items and what's being damaged or penetrated and this kind of thing, and address that as best you can. And then the equipment comes after that.
Okay, perfect. Carlos, how does the population of rats in a certain area affect the health of the human population? Have there been any recent studies to investigate this?
Yes, Carlos. So that's one of our main concerns, right? Public health. And so your question is spot on. And there's been many studies. If you sit back and you Google rats and public health, you'll have a long list of studies. Just recently, for example, and even to this day, here in New York City, we've had a disease called leptospirosis, which is a bacterial disease that can be lethal if it's not addressed. And we lost 2 people in New York City just a couple of years ago from rat-borne leptospirosis. So, but probably the number one issue we have to be concerned with rats and mice living too close to us is foodborne illness. We all know, oh, I must have eaten something in a restaurant. I don't feel good today. I'm on the toilet all day. I'm sick. I'm throwing up. Sometimes you may ingest bacteria or even a virus associated with food. And rodents can transmit those germs, say from a sewer or a dirty alley or a dirty basement, and then run all over dishes or something somewhere. And before you know it, you've picked up the same bacteria they're traveling through. And foodborne illness is extremely common throughout the world. And in some cases, when it's very severe, it can be lethal. But that's the number one most public health issue we probably face with rats and mice is foodborne illness.
Okay. And then we just have 2 quick more ones. One from Katima. Could mice and rats reside in the same residence?
Yes, Katima, they can. However, there better be plenty of food for both. Rats are extremely aggressive and very effective predators on killing and eating mice. And so when there's plenty of food, like in a livestock operation, I've sat and I watched rats and mice feed on spilled grain coming out of troughs side by side, touching each other, and each go their separate ways with no aggression whatsoever. But once you eliminate or restrict the amount of food available, for the rat, if there's any mice nearby, whether it's an apartment complex or a store or poultry or a swine operation, that rat becomes immediately aggressive on the mice for food, kills them and eats them, the same way the coyote we talked about is killing the rats in the canals.
Oh boy. And last one from Joel. Hi, doctor. Is there any ways to suppress their reproductive activity?
Well, right now, there are studies that are ongoing as to, and I'll use the term birth control pills. There are several products that have emerged on the US market. I don't know how they are in Canada. We in New York City are going to be doing pilots on some of those products this spring and summer. So far, several of those products have been out for some time. So far, we don't have any proof of citywide population control. And keep in mind that open population thing I showed you with all the circles. So the challenge might be when you have an open population like that, how would you get the birth control to all the rats or all the mice? It would be a significant challenge, but we shall see. We're going to be doing pilots and who knows what we're going to learn, but I think the future could be bright for them, but it depends on what we learn in the next couple of years. But right now, it's a big question mark.
Okay. And have one more. I'm going to close the chat after this one, but I feel like it's just a cute way to end it. Jason says, by chance, I happened to listen to your 2021 appearance on the Ologies podcast recently. You mentioned a standing bet that no one could bring you a 2-pound rat. Has anyone since come close?
Jason, that bet still stands. I do have and keep a $500 check. Now it's $500 in my wallet. And the first person brings me a 2-pound rat, whether it's Canadian or American, that check is yours. But first, I'm going to cut open the rat and see if you put any fishing weights in its tummy. And then we'll go from there.
That's awesome. Yes, I will keep my eyes out. Not that I've ever seen a rat. So either way, thank you so much for presenting, Bobby. It was so great to have you, and we're so lucky that you could attend with us. There's lots of great comments in the chat about your talk. And if there's any questions that we missed, feel free to shoot them in the chat and Bobby can talk directly to you in there. The chat is now enabled, so you guys are free to chat and comment and whatnot. There's no need to test anymore. So Bobby, thank you so much. And we'll bring Karen Wickerson on.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Hi,
All
Paige.
right.
You can see my presentation?
Screen looks great. You look great. We're all ready for you.
Okay.
So I will just introduce you quick, but for those that don't know, Karen is our rat and pest specialist with the government of Alberta, and she has been for the past 5 years. She graduated with a degree in social work, and after moving to Alberta, she decided to pursue her dream of working with animals. So she became a vet tech and worked in a rural mixed animal practice for 7 years before joining the government as a post-mortem technologist 13 years ago. She never thought her love of animals would lead her to administering a provincial-wide program to control rats. So please take it away. We're so happy to have you as well.
Thanks, Paige. I'm really excited to be here and really want to thank you and Megan for organizing this Pests in the City. I've talked to you guys in great length, but I've been doing this job for 5 years now, and I've really come to identify that we've done a great job in the rural areas promoting the program, but the urban areas now, I think, are going to be a big part of the future of the program, and I think there's a lot of awareness still that we can do, and certainly within the pest control industry as well in Alberta. I think we've done such a great job with the program that we've been able to prevent the permanent establishment of rats in the province. But because of that, we haven't needed the knowledge of rat control in the pest control industry. And so I'm just hoping that maybe we can increase some of that knowledge and certainly promote the program so that people are aware of what to do if they think that they have found a rat. So as Paige gave you a bit of my history, but as I said, I've been doing this role for 5 years, and yeah, have learned a lot over the years. And I also want to give a big thank you to Bobby again as well, because I did have the chance to attend the Rodent Academy that is put on by the City of New York in November. And for anyone who ever has a chance to attend, I highly recommend it. It was a real eye-opener for me. And really, I learned a lot about the history of garbage in New York, and it is actually quite fascinating. So for my talk today, I'm going to talk about legislation. I'm going to give you all the reasons why the program has been successful, essentially. We'll talk about the history, which plays into that. The rats themselves, I won't touch too much on that, but just show you photos of who we are concerned about coming into the province. And of course, critters that are mistaken for a rat and what the current rat control program looks like for people. So I'm part of Alberta Agriculture and Irrigation. That is the ministry that the rat control program falls under. And the legislation that we operate under for the program is the Agricultural Pests Act, and I will touch on that a bit. So under the rat control program, there's myself, and I have an assistant, Garrett Gerlitz, who just started last summer. And then also under the pest control program is our wild boar control program. Hannah McKenzie runs that. So I always just like to mention that. I know there's quite a few rural people attending, so I like to bring attention to all our programs. The Alberta Advantage, and I think I'll just go into a bit more detail about that. I talked about legislation. I'm going to get into what that means for Albertans, public education, and geography. So it's really kind of a trifecta that has come together to really help prevent the permanent establishment of rats in the province. The Agricultural Pests Act. So what this does is it authorized the Minister of Agriculture to designate as a pest any animal that is likely to destroy crops or livestock. So rats were discovered in 1950 along the Alberta-Saskatchewan border, and right away the Minister of Agriculture declared that a pest. declared them a pest. So what that means is that every person and every municipality is required to control and destroy rats. So as I mentioned, in 1950, they were discovered. The government was very forward thinking. They knew that rats, were a threat to agricultural, could cause agricultural losses, spread disease, damage infrastructure. And so they decided to declare them a pest, which, really was quite forward thinking at the time. And then it trickles down. So every person, as I said, is required to control rats, but also every municipality is required to ensure that rats are controlled if someone has them on their property. And that's kind of how the program works now. There's myself and Garrett who work officially for the government with the program, but then it's designated that every municipality must have a pest control officer to investigate rat reports for us. So when I receive a rat report, quite often if it's in the local Calgary area, Garrett and I will go out with the local municipality and investigate. Or if not, I can call a municipality throughout the province and they will have someone who will go out and look into the rat report for us. Now, when I talked about rats as a pest, I just want to give you a distinction between pests and nuisances in Alberta. So, as I said, rats under the Agricultural Pests Act are required to be controlled. And under the Pest Act, or listed in the Pest and Nuisance Control Regulation, are all the pests. So for our program, we're just really dealing with the Norway rat and the roof rat and wild boar when at large. But then we also have nuisances, and people kind of use those terms rat and pest interchangeably. So nuisances in the province under the Agricultural Pests Act may be controlled on your property, and you may give permission for other people to come on your property and control them. And of course, we've talked about, certainly coyotes were mentioned, they are a nuisance. And certainly a lot of you deal with control of, say, skunks and mice as well, even Richardson ground squirrels. As I talked about with the history, in 1950, rats were discovered at the Alberta-Saskatchewan border. So you can see here the migration of them westward across the prairies here. Around 1920, they were discovered along the the Saskatchewan-Manitoba border, and it took them about 30 years to make their way over to Alberta. And in that time, basically, we saw them coming and we were prepared. So we have the legislation in place that, as I said, the Minister of Agriculture declared them a pest. And these are, I'd like to throw in some of the historical photos of the program. These photos are along the Alberta-Saskatchewan border, the rat control zone, which I will touch on. Just kind of gives you an idea of the areas that were inspected or where rats were found initially at the border. So you can see we've got at the top right some old granaries. These are all made out of wood. They are full of grain. So rats could burrow underneath these granaries and then chew through the floorboards and access the grain that is stored. And so they had essentially a shelter and they had a food source. So they could in theory, overwinter under these granaries initially. But yeah, back in the day, 1950, everything was made of wood. Fortunately, there have been great improvements to farming practices, and we store grain a bit differently now. And essentially, how we store now is rat proof. But yeah, and there's just that little guy sitting on the bag of grain there in the middle too. So grain would have been stored in bags in these wooden granaries as well. So definitely easy for the rats to access. And then public education, I mentioned that. The government knew right at the beginning that they had to educate Albertans on why we don't want rats, the reasons, as I mentioned, damage to agriculture, losses to crops, spread of disease. So they launched a big awareness campaign, and that included these really, I think they're really cool posters. They drew on some of the World War II era warnings that or propaganda that was put out. So just to kind of scare people, he's the enemy. And they also did they hired people to go along the Alberta-Saskatchewan border to educate people. So they went to fairs, 4-H events, and talked to people, again, on why we don't want rats. They also started taxidermying, so stuffing rats as well, and placing them in all the agricultural offices along the border so that people knew what a rat looked like, because that was the other thing. People didn't actually know what rats looked like at that point. In our geography, and this is pretty critical also in the reason why rats have not been able to spread into the province and permanently establish. It's cold to the north. I mean, we've just had a week here in Alberta of minus 30 degrees. So, it's really hard for rats to survive outside in that type of temperature. Rats cannot travel over mountains. We have the Rocky Mountains to the west separating us from British Columbia. They would not survive trying to travel over mountains. It's too far. Montana is sparsely populated, so the farms are spread fairly wide apart down there. They do have some of the mountains as well. I recently was able to talk to the vertebrate pest specialist for the Department of Agriculture in Montana, and he said they may have some rats in Montana, but maybe in the bigger cities like Billings. Well, Billings is about 150,000 people, so quite much a bit smaller than Calgary or Edmonton. So Montana's never really been a threat. Initially, it was the eastern border there, so along Saskatchewan. And I'll point out that yellow strip along the border there, that is the rat control zone. So that was established back in the 50s as well. The purpose of it was to prevent the permanent establishment of rats all along the farm sites there. So every farm site from Cold Lake all the way down to the Montana border was inspected twice annually. And it's hard to tell, but the zone goes approximately 30 kilometers inward from the Saskatchewan border. So the rat control zone still exists today. We don't inspect every farm site for 30 kilometers inward. We do the first portion of it, which is about 8 kilometers. So again, spring and fall, the first approximately 8 kilometers is still inspected from Cold Lake all the way down to the Montana border. And I just like to throw this old photo in because it's really hard to fathom that a pile of rats. Initially, when the program started, Alberta didn't have the expertise to go out and control the rats. What they did was they contracted Napoleon Poulin from Poulin's Pest Control out of Winnipeg, and he was very interested in rat control. And so he came with a team in the early 50s there and went up and down the border for a period of time eradicating infestations. So this photo here is taken at a landfill from somewhere along the border. I'm not sure which location, but interestingly enough, I just learned recently that that pile of rats there has 10,000 rats in it. So kind of gives you an idea of how many rats they were actually eradicating along the border there. I won't touch too long on these, but these are the two types of rats, as I mentioned, that we're most concerned about in Alberta. So the Norway rat on the left and the roof rat there on the right. You can see the Norway rat generally has a bigger body with a shorter tail than its body. And then the roof rat has a shorter body with a longer tail. In general, the roof rat's tail, if you pulled it around to the front of the body, would go past the tip of the nose. The roof rat does have bigger ears than the Norway rat because the Norway rat is a burrowing rat, so that its ears are more closer to the body, whereas the roof rat, the ears are bigger, and if you pull them forward, they will cover the eyes. So that really can help in identification if you are trying to figure out perhaps if it's a mouse or not. But you can see the total length can be very similar for both of them. And I always just like to point this out. This is on our website. So if you go to alberta.ca/rats, we have a lot of good information there helping you identify rats, the Norway rat and the roof rat, and then rule out the other critters too that are mistaken for rats. But you can see here, we have mice, the house mouse at the bottom there too. So it just kind of gives you a good idea of the kind of the shape of their nose, the length of their tail as well. Historically, with the program, we have been concerned about rural infestations. That's where it's agricultural based. That's where the program started. These photos just give you an idea of what that would look like currently. with the program if we did have a rural infestation. This is an old granary as well. It has a wooden floor bottom. You can see the rats burrowed underneath into the ground, the Norway rat did, and then chewed through the base of the granary to access the grain inside. This was actually the first infestation I went out on 5 years ago, right when I started. These rats had overwintered under this granary and survived. And we found them in the spring, kind of, I think around March. They were brought in somehow to the farm. It was right along the border. So you can see, yeah, they can easily live in the rural areas. And then you can see the photo of the bales there. These bales, there are holes in it that the rats burrowed into. And again, these rats could have overwintered quite easily in these bales. They had a food source and they also had shelter. Urban areas. I've thrown in a couple extra photos here. A couple are from New York City and a couple are from my trip to New Orleans. I also did have the chance to attend a rodent academy in New Orleans as well. But just to give you an idea, Bobby talked extensively about garbage. If garbage is available to them, they can easily survive. And I just put the photo in the middle of that pile of old furniture there. That would be our harborage for rats as well, urban or rural, certainly, where, you know, if they had a food source close by, they could easily establish in that pile of garbage there. And I will point out the photo down at the bottom on the left there. That is from New Orleans as well. So you can see, yeah, they have a good, they really try and bring attention to the issue of rats in the city as well. Hitchhikers are the most common way that we see rats make their way into the province. Commonly, people who live in southern Alberta travel to the interior of BC, and there is quite a rat population for a number of reasons in BC. But kind of if you travel from that Sicamous all the way down to the border, as I said, yes, big rat populations. So we do see a lot of hitchhikers on vehicles come that way. I've got a photo there of a cover over a battery there. So someone was nesting in that. They hitched a ride from BC on the way back. And then I have a photo there down at the bottom showing that they can chew wires in vehicles. So that is something to keep in mind as well. I've really been encouraging people a lot. If you're traveling to BC, come back and check your vehicle. I'm told that the wiring coating on these wires is soy-based, so it's quite palatable to rats. So it is something they could have as a food source while they're hitching a ride under the hood of a car back from out of province. And the guy up at the top right there, he was found, he hitched a ride back to Lethbridge. The people who owned the vehicle had come back. They were home for a week from BC and then took their vehicle into a garage to have it serviced. And a technician went to pull out the air filter and found him in there. So, you know, he lived in that vehicle for a week. He survived quite fine. And most commonly, too, I find people will come back, park their vehicle in their garage, and come out the next morning and will either have found the rat dead on the ground, or will see evidence such as feces all around the garage that the rat is present. Other high-risk areas in the province can be, you know, Bobby mentioned a lot of them. Historically, for us, they could be recycling facilities, landfills, and even warehouses. So we're really trying to promote the program within these facilities. You may remember in 2012, for some people, if you lived in Alberta, that we had a big infestation at the Medicine Hat landfill down in the southeast part of the province. So these types of environments, you can see where they have a constant source of food coming in, and they can go undetected for quite a period of time. So that's what happened down in Medicine Hat. The rats had burrowed into the garbage here, and as the population grew, then people started to see them and certainly called us, and the Cypress County was heavily involved with helping us eradicate this. It took 2 years, but we were able to eradicate the infestation. And I just threw these photos in just to give you an idea of some of the confirmed rats, what a report looks like for us. We've had a couple there, the one on the sidewalk and on the snow there. Those happened over Christmas. People had been out walking their dog or just out for a walk and saw them and took a photo for us and reported it to us. The guy in the bait station was reported to us from a pest control company, which is great. As well. And I believe the other guy too, down in the far right corner, I think he was from a rural municipality. But this is just to give you guys an idea of kind of what we see for reporting of confirmed rats in the province. I will ask if anybody, or encourage, if anybody does get a call for a rat report, if you go out and do an inspection and you think that you actually have a rat, we just encourage you to send photos to us or any evidence, whether it is just feces or you think nesting. In these cases, we would like to be involved and help out or just be aware. We ask that you, if you can trace the source, if for sure it is a rat, try and figure out where it came from. And certainly, if you think there are any more, I know certainly pest professionals will be monitoring the situation. Businesses always must employ a pest control company. We don't come out and do the pest control for them. And things we look at certainly are cleanup of the facility and location. We want to make sure we remove all those food sources and nesting locations. And I'll just point out at that, the rats@gov.ab.ca, we're always happy to look at photos. Garrett or myself, we're always monitoring the email, and it's 24/7. So yeah, we certainly are happy to assist with identification. I just want to touch too, we do get questions on pet rats, and they are illegal in Alberta. So we do not allow people to have them. Pet stores do not sell them. The main reason is we just don't want people to become familiar with seeing rats. So if you see rats in someone's home, when you go outside, if you're walking in downtown Calgary or Edmonton and you see a rat coming out of a dumpster, people are going to be less likely to report them to us. So we will never allow pet rats to be legal. And people sometimes too, I like to point out, report the African soft fur rats to us. These technically are not part of the rat family. They're part of the mouse family. You can see they look quite a bit different there, if you look at them compared to a rat. They're, as I said, part of the mouse family. To me, they look more like a gerbil. People raise them for feeding to snakes. So I guess they're very high in protein, apparently higher in protein than a Norway rat. So technically, African soft fur rats are allowed in Alberta. People do raise them. It's just their name is misleading because they are a mouse. It's kind of one of my favorite parts about my presentation, because if you've lived in Alberta all your life, chances are you've never seen a rat in Alberta, maybe if you've traveled somewhere. And so identifying a rat can sometimes be challenging. The number one critter we usually have reported to us, or has been historically, is a muskrat. It's a larger rodent. It has a long tail. People quite often see them traveling along the side of the road during daylight, and that is not typical of a rat. But these guys do travel, even though they are a water rodent, they do travel quite a distance from water, and people think, well, it can't be a muskrat, it's a rat. But certainly we do receive a lot of reports of these guys. And then these are some of the other ones that are reported to us as rats. Mice, there are a lot of new people moving to Alberta from other parts of the world that have lived with rats and maybe have never seen mice. So if they do see a mouse here, they think that it might be a Norway rat or a roof rat. So a large part of what we do too on the reporting email is educate people on the difference. Tree squirrels, there's been, I'll just touch on these because it's been interesting in the Calgary area, and maybe some of the pest professionals in the audience have had reports of these black squirrels, which are not native to Alberta. For some reason, have lost the hair on their tail and kind of look like a rat. So we've received quite a few reports over the past couple of years about these guys. Bushy-tailed wood rat, or the pack rat. This is a native pack rat species to Alberta. It's also listed under the Agricultural Pests Act as a nuisance, so people can control them on their property. They live in the foothills of Alberta, so right along the entrance into the mountains there. People quite often go out there recreationally, so whether they're camping or they go out for the day to go hiking, you can bring these guys back as a hitchhiker on your vehicle, and they are highly, they cause a lot of damage, much like a Norway or roof rat as well. They're a single kind of solitary creature, so people are allowed to trap them on their property. Voles, people quite often, once the snow starts to melt in the spring, they see little holes in their lawn and they think that could be caused by a rat. But most commonly, it's these guys. They're about the size of a mouse and have a much shorter tail. And then the northern pocket gopher as well is reported to us quite a bit. They're a burrowing rodent, and quite often dogs and cats go out and bring them home to their owners, and people report them to us. They don't have great vision above ground, so as I said, they're a burrowing rodent, and so yeah, they're quite an easy prey for or kill for dogs or cats. And I threw this guy in. This guy just came to us kind of right over Christmas from the city of Leduc, actually, and he someone had trapped him for the city of Leduc, thinking it was a Norway rat, and I can understand by the coloring. But when we got it, and I saw the tail and the hair on the end of the tail, and just how short the tail is compared to a Norway rat, I had to do some more digging and kind of do some more research, and discovered it was a dagu, or sorry, a dagu, yes. And these guys are native to South America, and sometimes people raise them and have them as pets. So this one had escaped from someone's house in Leduc and was trapped. So just kind of to give you a wide variety of what is reported to us as a rat here at the program. We touched a bit, Paige did, on the Rat on Rats campaign. So that's currently happening. And as I said, I've been very excited to be a part of this. Is something I've wanted for the past 5 years. I wanted a new look for the logo of the program. And I also wanted to increase awareness of the program throughout Alberta. So we launched this in November of 2024. And it's a partnership with the Alberta Invasive Species Council. And my goal was to really promote the program throughout the province. And I think we've been doing a really good job of that. And there's been, as you can see, there's this design, there's quite a few different designs, but I'm really happy we could get the shape of Alberta on the logo. And I'll just give you some stats on the reporting to us. So we do keep track of every email report or phone call if it goes to 310 Farm to us. And this is specifically to us because all the municipalities in the province can receive reports directly as well. So you can see here, it's kind of grown over the years. 2024, we had over 600 reports, and that increased our reporting because of our reporting at the end of the year increased due to the Rat on Rats launch. So yeah, we were pretty excited to have over 600 reports last year. And you can see the confirmed rats average around 5% of what we receive for reports. And I'll further break that down, but just to give you an idea of the confirmed rats compared to the total reports we receive for the program. And this graph gives you an idea of the infestations over the years. We started in the 1950s. There was over 600 per year that were being eradicated, and now we're down to maybe a couple per year. We haven't in recent, probably 2-3 years, had an actual infestation at the border, which has been great. Saskatchewan has a really good program. I don't always try and make it look like we think Saskatchewan's the enemy because they have done a lot to decrease the rat population in the province, and in particularly along our border. The couple infestations we have had, and I should note here that an infestation in Alberta is more than one rat, but I can say that we've had a couple pet rats reported in the past couple of years, and also people have discarded feeder rats out in the, they choose to not throw them in the garbage. They may throw them up over their balcony and a couple at a time, and they get reported to us. So we do count that as an infestation. And this gives you kind of a breakdown for 2023, actually, of the critters that are reported to you. And again, you can see about 5% are confirmed rats. We've got muskrats at 35%. Mice as well are reported to us as well. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. You never know when you open the email and the photo what you're going to see. And I do get asked to do media interviews a lot, and people are always wanting us to comment on, what other cities are doing and what can other cities do. And, it's really, we're just so unique because, we started the program right when we saw them at the border. So it is really hard for me to comment, and I refrain from commenting on what other jurisdictions can do. But certainly Bobby's outlined the challenges that are involved with controlling rats once they permanently establish in these urban environments. Rat-free status, I always touch on that because we promote ourselves as rat-free. And I really like to clarify to people that what that means is rats are not able to permanently establish in the province. They get in, there's no way we can check every vehicle, every train, every transport truck coming into Alberta. That's why we try and really promote the program, have an awareness campaign. But I just want to make sure people understand, yes, they do get in, but we control them. And that's about it for me.
Awesome. Thanks, Karen. I will launch your poll right now because we forgot about Bobby's. I'm sorry, but there's 2 questions on the screen for Karen here. I will give you guys a minute to take those in. And then we have a couple questions as well, but I'll maybe only do 3 of them so that we can start with or get Bobby's poll questions in and then get Eric to get going. All right, so we have about 100 respondents right now. There's 276 of us online right now. That's crazy. Okay. I will mention that sometimes when the polls come up, they do show up on a different screen or behind the Zoom. So if you're not seeing it, maybe minimize and check if that's open. I think we're getting some good respondents here. So we've got 216 participated. Give it 30 more seconds here. We can answer a quick question in the meantime, though. Is there an entire city, sorry, is the entire city of Lloydminster part of the control zone, Karen?
Technically, no, I guess because, part of it is in Saskatchewan, but certainly we do offer our services and help in Saskatchewan as well, right along the border there. So we're very open to working with them if there is an issue.
Awesome. Okay, and we have 237 respondents, so that's 85% participation. I'm going to give you guys 1 more second here. And then I will end the poll and we can quickly go through them. There you go, and I'll share the results. So Karen, in what year was the rat control program established?
1950.
Nice.
And I didn't have that specifically. I know I mentioned it twice, but yeah.
I had to be listening. And what are the 2 types of rats that the rat control program responds to?
Yeah, the Norway rat and the roof rat.
Yeah. Perfect. So 90% of you got that one. Awesome. And I'll close that down. I will get 2 questions in for you, and then I'll launch Bobby's poll question here and maybe invite him to come back on screen and go through those questions with us. Has the rat control program considered increasing the rat control zone with the warming annual temperatures, example, north of Cold Lake or along the Montana border?
Definitely that is something we will keep an eye on. As I said, along the border, we are still inspecting twice annually, and we haven't had, any infestations in the past couple of years, but certainly we do monitor it. So I know certainly the government would look at that if it was needed.
Awesome. Jamie says, I'm surprised that there are not more hitchhiker rats since there are so much vehicle transport of goods between provinces and Canada and the US. We had a report of rats at the Cascades recycling facility in Calgary in 2024. Were they controlled enough that they did not spread?
Yes, yep, they were. The infestation is eradicated. So we do not have an infestation there. Yeah. And, it's possible, like probably, as I said, they get here, they're very weak if they haven't died already. So, I'm sure there's probably other hitchhiking rats that die or perish on their way here or soon after. These are just the ones that are reported to me, of course.
Okay. And last one, do they get many reports and have any issues with rats in the Northwest Territories?
I don't know. Unfortunately, yeah, I haven't followed the rat population in the Northwest Territories. Again, I assume they're just like us, and they certainly would hitch rides up there. But I don't know about their survival, of course, during the winter there.
Okay, perfect.
Hey,
Thank you so much, Karen. Yep.
Oh, so sorry to interrupt. There's a number of people who weren't able to answer those questions. I don't know if we want to repost Karen's poll questions really quickly, but there's a whole bunch of comments in the chat about that.
I can relaunch the poll. Yep, I can relaunch the poll.
And for everyone's information, it's important to answer these questions for the credits, and there are 2 questions that need to be answered. They will both appear at the same time. You just have to scroll.
So relaunching the poll will clear the existing results.
Okay.
So everyone will need to re-answer, but I will go through with that. I will give a minute or 2 here to answer, and we'll do a speed question. But if you can't see the second question, just do a little scroll and it's on there. After this set, we'll throw Bobby's poll questions up on there, and then you guys will have a chance to answer those ones too. We've got 220 participants, so we just need a few more. Kind of stuck around 2:30. So anyone that has previously answered, please re-answer again. And anyone that hasn't, please answer and scroll to that second question.
Paige,
So
could I just,
yep.
sorry, I was just, Brian is asking about if it's true there are no moles in Alberta. And if I could just say, yes, that is correct. People refer to the pocket gopher quite often as a mole, and it's not. So yeah, we don't have moles in Alberta.
Okay, awesome. I didn't even see that question in there.
So we just had another comment in the chat asking if there's another poll. So we're just reposted Karen's poll. Again, this is a requirement for the pesticide applicator credits. Be sure to answer these polls when they come up. That's kind of our test to make sure that you're paying attention, right? So if you miss them, we won't post another one again. But Karen's is up right now. There's 2 questions, and then we'll repost Bobby's, or sorry, we'll post Bobby's because we didn't do it last time. So that is the poll. Those are the poll instructions.
Exactly. And if you're not seeing it, it could have come up on a different screen or behind the Zoom page that you're on right now, because I find that it pops up randomly. So minimize those tabs and check it out.
So
but it should be on there.
Sorry, there's another question asking for the first poll. The first poll is currently posted. So, and we can't resend them. So there's no option for us to kind of send them out individually. They go out all at once.
Mm-hmm. And I have 88% that have participated. So we're missing about 30 people.
And another comment here asking to see the second question. They're both posted. So they are both on that list. So there's question 1 and question 2. So yeah, we're doing the same poll over. That's right, folks. So yep. So it's important that we won't do this over again. Next time it's really important that you're attentive and you get the polls when they come up. Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and close it though, because the number hasn't changed for about 30 seconds here. And I think that we need to launch Bobby's poll and get into Eric's talk. So I will close that now. You guys saw those results. And we will launch Bobby's. Maybe. Nope, there we go. So you should be able to see Bobby's 2 questions here. Please answer those. All right, so I guess we can answer the question or talk about the question while we're answering. We've got about half of the people participated. Oh, sorry, 70% participated. Bobby, your question was, new research just published in 2025 has proven that rat populations are increasing on a global scale due to 3 principal factors: climate change, urbanization, and the world's human population is also increasing. Guys, you thought this was true or false? Right now I have 232 participants, so 84% have participated. If there's anyone that can't see the poll, you just need to minimize your screen again and it should have popped up there. If you can't see the second question, just scroll down. I will give 20 more seconds for those 30 odd people that haven't answered the poll. And then we'll close it and check the answer here. All right. So I'll share the results. That first question, Bobby, you want to take over here?
Sure. Well, as everybody can see, the answer to the first question is true, right? And, but it's the first time we've had empirical evidence to really nail down what most of us have been saying for many, many years. So it looks like terrific answers, 99%. Okay. And the second question, and that was a little bit more challenging in thought, keeping Alberta rat-free requires cooperation, among, the different groups. So the one that's still developing is where we have a cooperative effort between private industry and the government entities, whatever those may be. So, but cities, as of the last several rat summits, have agreed that that may be a piece of the puzzle we all need to perhaps work on. We lose nothing by talking to one another as to, hey, what are you seeing? And the industry saying, and what about what we're seeing, and so forth and so on. So that's where it really takes pretty much everybody.
Awesome. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you guys for answering the polls. Thank you guys for your presentations. Karen, that was perfect. Awesome, as per usual. We will move forward with Eric's presentation. So Eric is from the Grove Eco-Friendly Pest Control company. He has a Bachelor of Science in Neuroscience from the University of Lethbridge, with a focus on animal behavior. He has been in the pest control industry since 2011 and started his own company, the Grove Eco-Friendly Pest Control, back in 2022. So Grove Pest Control focused on human treatment of vertebrate pest species by avoiding trap and translocate practices and reducing secondary poisoning by not using any rodenticides. So please take your time. Eric, feel free not to rush. We have a long break at 10:40, so we can go into that. Take it away.
Awesome. Thank you very much for the introduction. Yeah, we're going to be talking about skunks today. Paige already introduced me, so no need to reintroduce myself. But yeah, we do focus on pest vertebrate welfare and reducing secondary poisoning with rodenticides. So a lot of you already know a lot about what I'm going to be talking about today. Many of you probably have many more years of experience trapping skunks than I do. But there are probably also some noobs here as well. So we will be covering some skunk basics and hopefully also sharing some tips that everyone can learn from. So first, yeah, they're nocturnal, but I'd put it in quotes because actually they're most active during dawn and dusk. In the middle of the night, they're not actually super active. They are fellow pest control professionals. They love to go after mice, voles. They love to take out wasps and bees nests, especially in the fall when they're huge. That's a lot of great protein for a skunk. They'll even go after ground squirrels and other mammals of that size. They're probably not gonna fight with a adult ground squirrel, but they'll happily, go in a ground squirrel burrow and find the litter of young and eat that. So fellow professionals, they really like dark covered dens. As you know, under a front step or walkway, as we've all seen, it's probably not under like an open deck, when there's air going in through the slats and lots of airflow. That's not somewhere they're gonna like to den. I get calls all the time about, oh, there's a skunk under my deck. It's probably not actually denning there. It's probably just wandered under there looking for some food. Mating season is from February to March, where you're going to see a lot of increased movement, especially males are wandering around looking for females to mate with. And the females, if they don't like the male, they'll actually spray. And so you might get a lot more calls, or you might hear about skunk spray smells at this time of year. It's not because the dog attacked them or they're spraying people. It's probably because they didn't like a certain male. They have litters of 2 to 10 kits, but because of high infant mortality in the wild, it usually ends up more like 3 to 5 juveniles, surviving juveniles. So they're usually born in late April, anywhere till the end of May, and then they're weaned at 8 weeks. So that means you're gonna have immobile babies in the den from May all the way to July. So you definitely want to consider that if you're doing any trapping. You don't really want to abandon the babies, the kits in there. So ideally, you can find a way to remove the kits, or at least see if monitor if there are kits under there. And then the juveniles usually leave the den later that same year, but not always. Sometimes they will stay with mom and over the winter in the same den. So should we control skunks at all? Like, why not just let them be? They're so cute. They're a native species. They are good pest controllers, as we saw. Actually, when my clients call in, the first thing I explain is that skunks are a beneficial species. They rarely spray, and only when threatened. If you leave them alone, they will leave you alone. However, despite being a native species, we have created an environment that is entirely non-native. There are far too many suitable shelters and far too much food around in our cities for skunks to be controlled naturally. We've also eliminated most of their predators from our cities, coyotes, hawks, owls. So their populations can actually get out of control without our intervention. Just a quick note about rabies. Skunks are a common vector for rabies, which is a very serious disease. Once you notice the symptoms of rabies, it's too late. You aren't going to make it. So that being said, there haven't been any instances of skunks with rabies in Alberta for 30 years. So it isn't a concern for us, but it's still a good thing to consider and just be aware of. So here's a quick summary of what I'm going to talk about today. Different options for skunk control. So environmental, trap and translocate, trap and relocate, trap and euthanize, eviction via repellents, and eviction via one-way door. So we'll go through all of those one at a time. First is environmental control. So we want to eliminate those conducive conditions that's bringing them there, right? So that can be sealing trash containers. You want to clear the garden before winter. There's lots of tubers and roots underground that skunks love to go after. Removing fallen fruit from trees. You can see in the picture, skunks love to go after the apples and crab apples that are all over the ground in the fall. And eliminating rodents on the property. On that note, skunks are susceptible to rodenticides, secondary poisoning, because they can eat multiple poison rodents in a short amount of time. So yeah, if they eat one rodent, it's not going to be enough to harm them. But if they're on a property with 20 voles and all of those voles are eating your rodenticides, and the rodents are dying slowly because of the rodenticides, and it's making them an easy prey, and then all of a sudden the skunks got actually quite a significant amount of rodenticides in their system. So something to consider for sure. And then removing shelter for the skunks, blocking off potential shelters, especially front steps, walkways, and under sheds. And then just kind of making their life harder, making it more difficult to access the yard or wherever the food might be. That can be with like a wire mesh barrier, which we'll talk more about later, or just filling in things with dirt. Like, yeah, they can dig through the dirt, they can dig under fences, but the harder you make their life and that pathway, the less likely they're going to be going through there. So, moving on to trapping. These are very commonly used traps. I know a lot of companies in Calgary are using these traps. These are my personal favorites. They keep the skunks covered, so they're less likely to see you if you're approaching and less likely to be spooked and therefore spray as you're moving them. And reduces their overall stress, so making it it's a more humane solution than some other traps. This is a Comstock flush mount positive set trap. So you'll notice, I don't know if you guys can see my mouse, but you'll notice if this door is open, it doesn't actually stick out past the edge of the trap there. So you can place it flush against something. I'll show you a picture here. For example, this is called a positive set. So these skunks have nowhere else to go outside of their den other than straight into the trap. So it's a really effective way to trap. But with using these brown traps on the left, for example, it's a little harder to do that, right? Because that door can't open and close properly. And here's just another example under an AC unit or something. A great example of positive set trap. And then there's these traps. I really hate these traps. I don't recommend them at all. The idea is, that they don't allow the skunk to lift their tail to spray. Sure, but I find that they're often too small for larger skunks. They're hesitant to go in them. The door, then when it's open, blows down in the wind sometimes. And honestly, they're not, in my opinion, at least they're not a humane trap. Like they're stuck in there. They can't move for hours. Who knows how long they're in the trap before you come check it, And if it's cold outside, they can't curl up to stay warm. So it's actually pretty brutal for them. There's just better options, right? So here's some tips about trapping and my little AI generated image. I found that funny. Just a trail of marshmallows to a trap. Okay, sure. Don't 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 do this. Um, but yeah, marshmallows are a really great bait for skunks. I think they like the flavor, but also they kind of look like eggs, which is a very main primary food source for skunks. So, you know, putting a bunch of marshmallows in the back of the trap is really great bait. Other baits, canned fish food, cat food, um, sorry, not fish food, canned fish and cat food, chicken scraps, eggs, uh, but essentially like whatever the skunk has been eating on the property is always best. So if they're going through the trash, just grab a bunch of that trash and throw it in the trap, or um, if they're going after the fallen fruit on the ground, get the homeowner to clean that up and take a few of them and throw those in the trap. Um, it's a really great bait because they know that they think that it's safe and it's what they've been eating, right? Um, I really like marshmallows because nothing else is really attracted to marshmallows. So you're not going to trap cats with marshmallows. Um, you're not going to trap rabbit with marshmallows, right? So and they're just cheap. So really great bait. Um, Other tips, covered traps help keep the skunk calm and protect them from elements. If it's too hot, keeps them shaded. If it's raining, gives them some protection from the rain, and also protects them from other predators, bobcats, coyotes, house cats, dogs, are all gonna want to go after a skunk if they see it in the trap. So that helps. And then the skunk's gonna spray, and that's not pleasant for anybody. So just don't leave the trap covered with something the skunk can like pull into the trap or otherwise destroy. I learned that the hard way, of course. Towels, sheets, tarps, they're gonna destroy that and just pull it all into the trap, and it's just a disaster. So when we're talking about trapping, there are two kind of main ways we can relocate the skunk. It's just some terminology amongst professionals. So there's relocation, which is moving an animal from one location to another within its existing home range. And then translocation would be moving it outside of its existing home range, which often involves moving it a considerable distance because you don't want them to just walk back into the home range. Otherwise, kind of defeats the purpose. Now, if your client incorrectly calls it relocation, you probably shouldn't correct them and say like, well, actually, it's called translocation. But it's good knowledge to have when discussing it amongst professionals, right? So relocation is useful for evicting a skunk while installing barriers to their den, which we're going to talk more about later. It's useful for releasing skunks which have been trapped accidentally. People leaving out a squirrel trap a skunk. You really don't need to like relocate it outside the city. You can just open the trap and let it go about its day. And it's the best method for just removing a stranded skunk like in a window well or something. And then translocation, outside of its existing home range, usually that'd be outside the city somewhere in our case. It's useful as a means of ensuring the skunk will never return. Most importantly, it's perceived as humane. People, our clients don't want to kill the skunks, so they're like, yeah, come take the skunk, please take it away somewhere nice and to a nice happy place where it's going to live happily ever after. Um, that's not the case. We're going to talk about that in a second, but that's what people assume, and so it's the most common method that I know most pest control companies use. But yeah, there's lots of issues, so just let's talk about that. Um, Translocation is really inhumane. It's extremely stressful, the transportation, in the trap for hours and then in your truck, totally alien environment for them. So they're going to lose weight throughout that process, and that weight is their resources to make it through the next winter, right? Whether it's summertime now or wintertime, they need that fat reserves to get through the winter. So that's going to end up causing lower survival rates. Once they're translocated, they have no knowledge of where to find shelter, food, water. They've probably been brought up in an urban environment, and now they're being move to the wilderness. They don't necessarily know how to survive out there, They have no knowledge of the hazards in the area, especially roads. Like we see so much skunk roadkill. A lot of that is probably translocated skunks that just don't understand, the dangers. And also they don't know about other predators in the area, um, other competing skunks. Skunks are territorial, so it might be hard for them to find a suitable spot, especially like in our industry. There's so many pest control companies in the city, each of them probably trapping and relocating or translocating like 100 skunks a month or more. Um, there's only so many places we can bring those skunks. And so how many skunks are we just like piling into the same areas where there's just limited resources and shelter for them, right? And so that death is usually going to be slow and painful. It's really not a great option. But there's other issues, right? That's transmission of disease and parasites to new vulnerable regions. That could be like bacteria, viruses, but even like ticks. Rabies is, it's not an issue here, but the more we, as an industry in general, like move skunks around, the more possible that something like that is. So, um, and as we remove skunks from an area, it just creates a vacuum of skunks in that area. Other nearby skunks are just going to move in, because there isn't that territorial uh, pressure, right? So that's not a permanent solution for your client. It's something that they should know. Um, yeah. And then I did a lot of research on survival rates after translocation, and there's not a lot of great research, to be perfectly honest. But from everything I could read, especially in like similar species, it's less than a 50% survival rate. Almost zero in juveniles or baby or small kits. And even with adults, it's probably close to 0% survival rate in the wintertime when they don't have a shelter to find right away. But the other issue, like on the business side of things, is that it does require driving long distances. And time is money. If you're not driving to a suitable location to translocate them, um, because you don't want to drive that far, or you're busy, especially in the summer, I know how it is. Drop it off in a farmer's field just outside the city limits. That's not a great solution. Skunks have nowhere to den in the middle of a farmer's field, a wheat field. It's just going to end up getting hit by a car or killed by some other predator or find a way into the farmer's house. And then, that's a problem for them now. So there are better options, right? There's trap and euthanize, or humane dispatch is the more official term. This is one of the most humane methods. You can see the picture here. That's a euthanization chamber. You just put the trap in there and turn on the CO2. I'm not going to go into detail on how to do that, but I'm sure you can find how to do that online, or you can ask me later. There's no need to drive long distances. There's no chance of disease transmission, and it's really cheap. Like the CO2 costs like nothing. Once you have that euthanization chamber, it's just really cheap and easy. But yeah, of course, it kills the skunk, guaranteed. Some people don't like that, so you just need to kind of educate your clients and that it is the most humane option. Still, maybe they don't want to do that, but we'll talk more about that later. Um, Other options are eviction via repellents. So predator urine, ammonia is the best one, honestly, but I don't really know where to find it these days. Used to be super common cleaner in hardware stores, but it's not anymore. But I'm sure you can find it somewhere. Vinegar is a good option, and then lights. Shining a floodlight down into the den is actually really effective. And sound, like a radio or something, all night and day long. If you combine all these things together, it really makes their den a really annoying, uncomfortable place, right? And so they're likely to move on. And even the mother might even remove any kits herself if it's an unsuitable place. So it can be a great way to actually get the kits out of the den without trapping. You can use pepper spray or hot sauce or something, but I don't recommend just like blasting pepper spray into the den. That's also not going to be humane at all, right? Like that's really terrible. It might even kill the skunk if it can't get away or get any air. Um, Eviction via repellents is not a permanent solution, right? So you want to combine these with exclusion for best results. And then we'll talk about exclusion. So this is wire mesh exclusion under a shed. This is a trench that's been dug out under the shed, around the shed, sorry. For skunks, you probably want to bring that wire mesh a little farther out, like maybe a foot out, so that they can't just dig underneath. And then, of course, you don't want to trap them in there, so you need a way for them to get out. So we use a one-way door. This is an example of what a one-way door might look like under a structure, or there's another option with a plastic one with a glass door, or not glass, but a see-through door. So it's a little easier for the skunks to realize they can get out through there. Here's another great product, Dig Defense. This is extremely fast and effective if the ground is nice and soft. If it's rocky and hard or frozen, you're gonna absolutely hate your life for the next hour or two while you try to pound this into the ground. But yeah, it can be a really great fast option for keeping skunks out. And here's an example of dig defense and a one-way door setup. These are really great permanent solutions, right? This exclusion. So yes, it is a lot of work trenching out around a front walkway or a shed. It can take hours. And so, yeah, it's going to be expensive, but there's a lot of value in having a permanent solution, right? Uh, your clients are going to see a lot of value in that. If you can sell the service well, they're going to be willing to pay. They don't want to deal with this again in a year or two down the road, right? So people see a lot of value in that, and they're willing to pay a lot of money, actually, which is great for us as an industry. It's time for the quiz. I think it's a good time to do the quiz. Give my voice a bit of a break if you want to run that page.
On it. You can see it now, I hope. We've got 2 questions on this poll too. So again, just scroll down if you can't see that second one. And we'll give a minute or so for everyone to answer. Eric, I love your impersonation of people.
Yeah, thank you. I noticed a couple questions. I'll probably address them later. But before I get a bunch of questions, like I'm not a biologist. I'm just a pest control guy like you guys. Yes, I've done a lot of research on skunks, but I'm not really up to date on like skunk populations and that kind of thing. But I'll still answer them to the best of my ability. But yeah, just so you guys know, I'm not a not an expert on that.
Awesome. We have about 80% participated. So get your answers into these questions. We'll close it off and get the rest of Eric's talk going here. Can go through those answers. I think they pop up on your screen here too. So 84%. I'll wait till 86. All right, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So they should pop up on your screen there.
Awesome. So skunk juveniles, yeah. I didn't explicitly say this, but yes, it was usually leaving their mother's den in the fall. Um, yeah, sometimes they will stay over winter, but it's not super common. Um, and then how many skunks have been found to have rabies in Alberta is actually zero. So it's not an issue in Alberta, but we don't want it to be an issue in Alberta either, right? So definitely want to keep an eye out on any symptoms of rabid skunks. And just, yeah, yeah, okay. All right, can I move on?
Go ahead. Yep.
Awesome. So this is the ideal order of operations for skunk control. At least this is what we do at Grove. So first, I ask my clients to try to tolerate the skunks if they can. You know, again, they're not harmful. If you don't have a dog, especially, they're not going to be spraying you. Dogs can be an issue, though, of course. So next step would be environmental control and eviction via repellents. If that doesn't work, eviction via one-way door and sealing the den. If that still doesn't work or it isn't an option for whatever reason, trapping and euthanizing. So really, you just need to like know your client when you're selling these services, right? Is the guy on the left here gonna care if you harm the skunk or not? Probably not. Is the woman on the right going to want you to kill the skunk? You know, even if it is a humane option like euthanization? Probably not. So it's just about understanding your client and educating them on what the best option is. And so, you know, as a company, you can offer a couple different options. You don't even need to change how you perform the service necessarily. It's just, yeah, it's more about how you explain it and sell the service. Almost done here. I really just want to improve our industry, right? So, here's some great resources for learning more about wildlife, and pest control in general. NUCOA is a great resource based out of the States. They have lots of training available for technicians. Um, they also have a great Facebook group, and another great Facebook group is Pest Cemetery. Um, these groups are full of professionals from all over the place, mostly the States, all like collaborating to improve the work that we do. So find, you know, find what's best for you and your company, but my main message is like be honest with your clients, you know. Don't fearmonger about rabies when we don't actually have rabies here. Don't tell them that the skunk's gonna be okay after you translocate them, because probably not. At least explain to them, tell them the truth. If they still want to translocate the skunk after that, you know, that's fine. That's between your company and theirs. But let's be honest. The more professional we look as an industry, the more respect we'll get from clients, which allows us to charge higher prices and make more money. You know, win-win for everyone. Um, we can do better for the skunks, for our businesses, and for our clients. Thank you for listening. I don't think I think we can skip the question period. But please like type your questions in the Q&A, um, and I will answer them to the best of my ability. Again, I'm not a skunk expert. I'm just a pest control guy, but I will answer them to the best of my ability over the next 10 minutes or whatever. All right. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much, Eric. You took the words right out of my mouth. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, throw them in the Q&A again. Eric can answer them directly. And we will just go on a little bio break right now. I think for 5 minutes, so we'll resume at 11:03. Very random, but I think that will stick with you for now. And then we can get started with the next presentation. We will see you soon. Thanks again, Erica.
Thanks.
I threw up a couple QR codes on screen as we have some events coming up. Nick and Samir mentioned their pest management conference on February 27th and March 1st. The AISC also has a couple events coming up in March. That would be our pre-conference workshop with a lot more pesticide applicator credits, as well as our annual conference that has even more credits. So I encourage you guys to attend. They're really great events, lots of different speakers, and all those QR codes will go to the event pages for more of the description and anything else that you need for those events. Coming up now, we have Megan Evans. She is the executive director for the Alberta Invasive Species Council, as well as the Alberta Native Bee Council. So she's a terrestrial ecologist with over 10 years in the field. She's passionate about protecting biodiversity, especially native plants and pollinators, and she contributes to those efforts through her work as the ED for both the Invasive Species Council and the president of the Alberta Native Bee Council. So I will hand the mic over to you, Megan. Take it away.
Great. Thanks, Paige. Are you going to give me till 11:35?
I can.
Okay.
Yes.
I'll try and go quick. How does that sound?
You bet.
Perfect. And this looks okay to you?
Looks good.
Awesome. Okay, thanks. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. The reason why, as Paige mentioned, I do wear two hats. So I work with Paige and the team at the great team at the Alberta Invasive Species Council. And then I also work part-time with the Alberta Native Bee Council. So there's a lot of synergies and overlap in these worlds. And today is kind of, when one of those overlapping events is happening. So the reason why we're talking about bees in a pest workshop is because at the Alberta Native Bee Council, we get calls every single year from people who have found bees on their property and for whatever reason they need to get rid of them. So bees are obviously very important creatures because they're pollinators, but in some cases they can be a public safety risk. They can pose risk to infrastructure, housing, stability, mold. There's a lot of problems if there are problem bees. Now, the topic is a little bit complicated because there's a lot of different kinds of bees. So this is why we're talking about bees today in a pest workshop. And so we're going to start by having a little quiz. And this one doesn't count for anything. This is just a quiz for you. I want you to tell me which are the non-bees. And so just type into the chat. I can see the chat's open on my screen. And so, there should be numbers, maybe perhaps on all but one of them there. Which you can probably figure out which number it should be. I want you to put in the chat what number of individual on the screen that you think are not bees. So if you have time, I'm not seeing any come in, but that's okay. Oh, here we go. So we're thinking 1, 4, 5, 6, 1, 4, 5, 7, 6, 2, 7, 6. Okay, there's a lot. 1 and 6 are really common. 1, 4, 6. Okay, I'm going to get cut right to the chase here and give you the answer. If you selected bee number 6, which does not have a number, it is the one in the bottom left, sorry, I shouldn't say bee number, but insect number 6 and insect number 9, you would be correct. Number 6, which is this one here, if you can see my cursor, and number 9, those are not bees. Number 6 over here, this is a syrphid or a hoverfly. Number 9 is a robber fly, and it's a bee mimic. There's robber flies in all different sorts, shapes, colors, and sizes, just like our bees. So these are images of insects that you'll find right here in Alberta. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, and 10 are all bees that you'll find right here in the province. You don't have to go super far to find them. So, I put this out there to kind of really question everyone thinks they get bees, but then when you start digging down into the issue, it's actually quite a bit more complicated. Tremendous diversity of bees in the province, and we'll talk more about that. So today what we're going to do, we are going to talk about native bees, and we're going to talk specifically about their status and how they're doing, because that's really important from a species at risk perspective and from a protection perspective. Are you able to euthanize bees? Is that legal? And we're going to answer those questions today. We'll talk about managed bees and the very, very, very important difference between our native bees and managed bees. And if you don't know that right now, you will know it by the end of the talk, and that's really important. And it's important to how you will treat problem bees. Are you dealing with a native bee? Are you dealing with a managed bee? And then finally, I'll give you some tips and tricks about addressing problem bees. And, Eric's messaging was music to my ears. It's the same kind of stuff. There's best practices that we can do. It's really about educating homeowners, landowners on these different topics. And a lot of times we can live with bees, and in some cases we can't because there are issues and risks associated with that. So we'll dive into that today. So again, in the interest of time, we're gonna blast through a lot of material here. So these are bumblebees, right? We all know what bumblebees look like. They're big and they're loud and they're obvious. You don't have to go far to find one. So in Alberta, we have a total of 371 native bee species. So 371 different kinds of bees in the province, yet only 30 of them are bumblebees, so less than 10%. But this is probably what comes to mind for you when you think about bees, right? So bumblebees make up less than 10% of our native bees. And in fact, the majority of our native bees look more like the things that we saw on that first slide, right? All those kind of crazy colored bees and whatnot. But bumblebees we get bumblebees, we understand them. They are social insects. This is their life cycle. Right now, all of the bumblebees that we have in Alberta are mated queens that are hibernating, typically in the soil. So they're hibernating in the soil. They mated last summer, fall. They'll emerge in the spring, quite ravenous, as you might imagine. Then they need to find a nest. So they will find a nest in the wild, in old rodent holes, in tree cavities, under wood piles, in people's insulation. They love to nest in insulation in the sides of people's houses. They're cavity nesters. So they want to get into some place that's protected from the elements and predators. They really like bedding material. We put out bumblebee boxes for bumblebees, like bird houses, but for bumblebees, and we put raw cotton in there for them to bed down in. But in cities, they will get into your insulation sides of your houses and nest quite readily in insulation. So they'll nest, then they start laying eggs. Those eggs become workers. Those workers then go out and do all the foraging activities. And as the season progresses, the queen lays eggs that'll become new queens, and she lays eggs that will become males. The new queens, the newly emerged queens, the newly emerged males leave the nest, they mate, at which point everybody dies off. These bees have an annual life cycle. And that's important for us to remember when we start talking about, problem bees, how do we manage them? What is the advice we're going to give to homeowners? So they have an annual life cycle. So towards the end of the summer, after the newly emerged queens mate, everybody dies off. The founding queen, the workers, the males. It's just that newly emerged, newly mated queen that will go on to hibernate and then start the cycle over again. So that can be really important. If someone has a bumblebee colony nesting in their house, you could, perhaps suggest to them, if it's their back door or secondary door, maybe you could just leave it for now and then seal up the entrance in the fall because nobody overwinters in that nest. And then you can not do any harm to the bees and we can all live in peace, kind of a thing. So just some insights there into the life cycle of our bumblebees, which again are the minority of our native bees. In fact, the majority of our native bees are what we call solitary bees. And there's kind of a lot to unpack there. They're not all truly solitary, et cetera, et cetera. There's exceptions to every rule in the bee world or the insect world. But this life cycle that you're seeing on the screen is much more common to come across in the bee world. So what you have is you have a single female right here on the very top. We have an adult. She's going to generally dig a hole in the soil. Most of our native bees are solitary ground nesting bees. They'll dig a little hole in the soil, they'll lay an egg, and then leave behind a little pollen ball, which is the orangey thing you see here, and then the egg is the little rice-looking thing. That egg develops into a larvae, and it's the larval stage that consumes the pollen ball of food. And then the larvae develops into a pupa, and then typically this bee will emerge next year. So the only interaction the mother has with her offspring is laying the egg and, leaving behind the food. She seals up the nest at this point and goes on, and that bee will emerge next year and the cycle will continue again. So this is much more common for native bees in Alberta than, a bumblebee life cycle, for example. And, in the province, I wish we had more time. This is fascinating stuff. And there's so many different kinds. 371 native bee species in Alberta. That's almost twice as many as all the mammals, fish, amphibians, and reptiles combined. So when you think about all the life histories and the ecology and the habitat requirements, et cetera, of that massive group of animals, you kind of need to, expect it to be just as diverse for all these different types of bee species, right? And certainly they all look like insects, but they all look very different. So on the screen here, I've got a leafcutter bee, this beautiful mama right here. She's cut out this piece of leaf with her specially adapted mandibles, and she's going to nest in those tubes or those straws or those bee hotels, or in the wild, what would be a hollow stem. And she's going to create little rows. And you'll find that sometimes leafcutters nesting in insulation in people's houses as well, or little cavities that they can get into, but they really like stems or cylinders, with small diameter. She's going to create a little nest cell with a piece of leaf. Instead of nesting in the ground, she forms this cell with leaves, lays an egg, leaves behind a pollen ball, seals it up. And then in a tube, she's going to put them all side by side in a row. And then mason bees, similar to leafcutter bees, they make those same types of cells, but they use mud, just as their name suggests. We have these mining bees. These are expert excavators, which is how they get their name. We have plasterer bees, and we have sweat bees, and we have loads of different kinds of bees. So they all have different habitat requirements. You're gonna find them nesting in different areas, and whatnot. So just to really bring attention to the tremendous diversity and differences in ecologies and stuff of these different bees. So what do these bees need? Well, I wasn't sure how much detail to go into here, but it's always important for us to talk about what bees need and why they're being impacted. So they need food, shelter, and they need protection from things that cause them harm, like pesticides and diseases. These are some examples of native plants. Native plants provide everything that our native bees need. Because they come in a variety of different colors, shapes, and sizes, much like our native bees. A little teeny tiny short-tongued bee may not be able to drink the nectar from a long corollaed flower or a very long flower like you see in some of these examples. But, our native bees evolved with these flowers. They're really important for native bees sustainability. These bees also have a variety of different nesting requirements. Most of our native bees, again, they nest in the soil. So access to bare soil is really important. You might get calls going to people's houses or playgrounds or areas where there's access to sandy soils where you'll see these little tunnels. And that might be like native bees nesting in aggregation. So some of these solitary bees. This is an example of a bee emerging from her nest. Some bees have the ability to actually excavate dead or decaying wood or use existing beetle galleries. I've got this brush pile on the bottom left-hand side here, and it's kind of ugly, but this is great bee habitat. So, you're very likely to find bees nesting in that, which is messy, but very common. The bottom center, this is a bumblebee nest under a cement step. I'm sure you've gotten calls about that. We get calls about it all the time. Again, a little cavity that they can get under that's sheltered that they'll be quite happy with. And you can see the little cells for the bumblebees. So this is a dead giveaway you're dealing with a bumblebee nest if you see these waxy cells kind of all like globbed onto each other, much in a disorderly type of manner. So these are bee nesting habitats. These are all kinds of places where you'll find bee nests. I should have put a photo of a bee and a bumblebee or other bees nesting in homes because again, that's part of the reason why we're here. So again, some more context about how our bees are doing. We know that insects are declining across the globe. That is happening. That was, very much shown through anecdotal evidence for a long time. Like, oh, I've squeegeed my windshield every year doing this drive for 30 years. I don't have to squeegee my windshield anymore. There's no bug guts on the window. It's not happening anymore. And there's strong empirical evidence suggesting that bees are declining as well. And we have some evidence of that right here in Alberta. Full disclosure, this is not a peer-reviewed article. There's no spatial replication, just temporal replication. So this was research that we helped work on with Dr. Ken Richards, who sadly now passed away, but he started this research in the 90s. He walked these transects in Waterton Lakes National Park. He observed the number of bees he came across per hour and per hectare, and he was looking at just bumblebees. And you can see, again, can't speak statistically here, but there's a big drop in our bee species, the bumblebee abundance in a national park, natural protected area, from the 1990s to present day. So why are bees declining? Bees, along with other insects, these are the major things that are impacting them. Pesticides, across the board, the use of chemicals are problematic for bees. So that's one that's definitely impacting them. We know climate change is going to have impacts with the missynchronicity of bees emerging with their floral resources. There's also extreme weather events that cause direct mortality. With habitat loss, pathogens, and misunderstanding of native bees and the issues that impact them. Now, we don't have time to get into this today, but bring this up. There's a lot of different things that are at play here that are, causing our native bees to decline. So the status of bees in Alberta, there's 375 bees on record in Alberta. 4 of those are non-native, including the European honeybee that we'll talk about later. So 2% are exotic or non-native. About 1/3 of our bees are secure or apparently secure. 9% are vulnerable, at risk, or declining, and a whopping 2/3, almost 2/3, 58% are unrankable because we simply don't have enough information to assign a conservation status ranking to them, which is horrific and terrible. We need to do a lot to fill that gap. But ultimately, the situation here is not great, right? About 1/3 of our native bees are doing okay, 10% are rare or declining, and 2/3 we have no idea. So that's a problem. And I've got QR codes that link to the sources of this information if you're interested in learning more. So I want to break down for you bee species at risk considerations in Alberta. So the first consideration we're going to look at is the Federal Species at Risk Act, which you can get in big trouble if you violate this. But there's very few instances that you're going to come across in Alberta where this would be applicable. And we'll talk in great detail about that as well. So under the Federal Species at Risk Act, and hopefully my QR codes work, sometimes they don't, but if not, I can send links. This will link you to the federal listing of species at risk, and you can sort by province, by taxa, by whatever. So it's a really handy resource. And again, it's important that you know how to do your own information, your own research, because this information can change as species are added to the list or as recovery strategies are finalized for species. That has implications for where bees are protected. So these are the 5 species that I want to point out to you that are listed kind of under the Federal Species at Risk Act. And the 3 that are highlighted have protections associated with them. So there's this gypsy cuckoo bumblebee, there's this western bumblebee, and to a much lesser extent or concern, the Macropus cuckoo bee, which is listed as endangered and has a finalized recovery strategy, but it doesn't list as Alberta as part of its range, but it has been found here. I think that's all I want to say there, but we will go into this. So under the Federal Species, and this is boring, I'm sorry, but this is important stuff. This is kind of why we're here. So under this Federal Species at Risk Act, Section 32 is a section that says no person shall harm, kill, harass, capture, or take an individual of wildlife species that is listed as extirpated, endangered, or threatened. So that's why I only have these 3 species listed here, because while these other 2 are listed, they're not endangered or threatened, which is what comes into play for protections, right? So it's really understanding this legislation and how it applies to you if you are asked to euthanize bees. However, this Section 32 does not apply in lands in a province that are not federal lands. So those species are only protected on federal lands. Federal lands are national parks, airports, indigenous reserves, and military bases, like 10% of the land base in Alberta, and not likely places where you're going to be called for issues, right? So those are 3 species that you cannot harm. You cannot harm those 3 species on federal lands, or so you cannot harm the western bumblebee, the gypsy cuckoo bumblebee, the Macropus cuckoo bee on federal land, or where their critical habitat has been delineated or outlined or as delineated, where the critical habitat has been delineated, but that has yet to be the case for the 2 species that are in Alberta. So it has to be critical habitat has to be identified for a species, and it has to be stated in a final recovery strategy for these species at risk. That is not the case for the 2 bumblebee species at risk in Alberta. So again, this is a lot, it's a mouthful, but it's really important to understand this legislation. And I'll summarize this again as we go along if it's not quite clear. I'll bring this up again. So these are the 5 species that are addressed through the Federal Species at Risk Act. We've got 3 that are protected per Section 32. However, they're only protected on federal land, which is airports, indigenous reserves, national parks, military reserves, or when there's been a critical habitat identified for that species in an approved recovery strategy. And we don't have that for the 2 species that are present in Alberta. So it's technically, unless you're on federal land, it's a non-issue. So those bee species at risk, I wanted to show you what they look like. I don't expect anyone here to be able to identify these bee species. We can actually support you in that. So this is the western bumblebee. The 2 bumblebee species at risk are these beautiful white-bummed bees. There is another white-bummed bumblebee that is very common, but is easy to distinguish from these ones, and it is not of conservation concern. So these are the 2 bumblebee species that are listed as endangered and threatened under the Species at Risk Act. And this one is really interesting. I wish we had time to go into the ecology. Paige is going to cut me off here, but we don't have time to go into the ecology of these species. But this is the Macropus cuckoo bee, and it is listed as endangered. And it does have a final recovery strategy, but it does not list Alberta as part of its range. After that recovery strategy was drafted, they found this bee in Elk Island National Park. And we thought, like, this bee is so uncommon. Scientists thought that it was extinct for decades. And yet they went 40 years without finding it. And then they found 2 species in Nova Scotia. And then they did the species at risk assessment. They put together the recovery strategy. And then many years later, they found 1 of the species in Elk Island Park. And I can tell you, we've been surveying in Elk Island Park and we haven't found it. So the chances of you coming across this bee are slim to none. And it also, to kind of explain how unlikely it is you'll come across this bee is a cuckoo bee. It means it invades the nest of its host species, the yellow loosestrife bee, which is on the right here. This is the yellow loosestrife bee. And the yellow loosestrife bee is an oil, it collects floral oils from a single plant species, this yellow loosestrife, the fringe yellow loosestrife, I believe. So it's very unlikely that you're going to come across this cuckoo bee because it needs to be in the presence of the host species, which needs to be in the presence of this yellow loosestrife plant. So really, 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 really rare. And you're very unlikely to come across it, and you'd be unlikely to be called in to exterminate these bees as well. I also want to point out that there is provincial regulations that can impact species at risk considerations, which would be the Provincial Wildlife Act and associated regulations. However, there is a section for endangered invertebrates, but none are listed, which is kind of upsetting because it's not that there aren't endangered invertebrates, but there's not really a lot being done on that front. So there's really no provincial considerations here from a species at risk standpoint. Okay, so I'm going to summarize that again because it was a mouthful. So your species at risk considerations for native bees only on federal lands. You're prohibited to harm the western bumblebee, the gypsy cuckoo bumblebee, the super duper elusive Macropus cuckoo bee, or when critical habitat has been delineated in approved species at risk recovery strategy, which we don't have for these species. So you're really dealing with federal lands. Now, that's not to say that those recovery strategies won't be drafted and or approved. So again, it's important for you to be aware of this. And maybe keep in touch with the Alberta Native Bee Council, because we'll let people know when recovery strategies are approved and when these things change. Now, sadly, there is no protection for the other 372 bee species present in Alberta. No protections whatsoever. And that comes with a caveat unless there's a specific provision by the landowner or a municipal government or a provincial park who, like, you can't go take things or kill things in provincial parks, right? So that's just kind of broadly applied. It's so that's important to factor in. But there's no species at risk protection for the other 372 bee species in Alberta. So let's talk about honeybees. So this is probably, we didn't talk really about honeybees at all. So this is probably the other bee that really comes to mind when we think about honeybees, or when we think about bees, is the image of a honeybee, right? We see, with the hives, that's kind of a typical image that we have. So honeybees are non-native to North America. They've been here for a long time. They were introduced by early European settlers and used in early days for honey and for wax production. More recently, they're used extensively in crop pollination. So this is the annual American honeybee migration, where literally they ship like almost all the colonies in the States on the back of trucks, and they send them to California for almond pollination. And when they're done there, they ship them all around to do other things. And so, this crop pollination has become really big business, but it doesn't come without its own issues. The main issue with that kind of migratory beekeeping is spread of diseases. And for example, would be these varroa mites that, are very easily kind of moved between colonies and very deadly to honeybees. So honeybees are impacted, these bee colonies are impacted by a number of things, but they have beekeepers to help them, right? They're not designed to live in our climate. They're not adapted to live here. And I think, because they're originated and evolved in more temperate locations, they have a perennial life cycle, which is in contrast to our native bees that all have an annual life cycle. And that's, again, important to consider if you're giving a homeowner advice on whether or not they need to deal with their bees. If you have a perennial honeybee colony living in the walls of your home, a honeybee colony can have 40,000 bees in it. That can become a public safety issue. That can become a structural issue for mold, and all kinds of things. And you don't necessarily want that in your home. In fact, we would always recommend removing honeybees that have found themselves nesting in a home. Okay, but honeybees. So you hear every year honeybees. Oh, we're going to hear soon about the overwintering mortality of honeybees in Alberta. And the media will come crying wolf about, honeybees, the bees are dying, save the bees, blah, blah, blah. And this is really a management issue. So the reason why our honeybees die every year is because of varroa mites, like we saw in that picture, and they transmit diseases. They can decimate colonies. Varroa mites are becoming resistant to the treatment options that we have. That's a big problem. That's a big, big problem for beekeepers. They freeze to death, they starve to death. And so the reason why I point this out is because honeybee mortality, honeybees in general, are not a conservation or species at risk issue. They are a management issue. They are very important agricultural species. We need to keep them safe and healthy, but they are much like chickens, right? You're not going to save the birds by getting chickens in your backyard, much like you're not going to save the bees by getting a honeybee colony, or like not euthanizing a honeybee colony in a home where it needs to be euthanized, right? So things to think about. And we do have large overwintering die-offs, but this is an agricultural species and of management concern. Now, fortunately, in Alberta, we do have a piece of legislation devoted entirely to honeybees. It's called the Bee Act. It deals with a single species, a livestock species, the European honeybee. And there's no prohibition on killing honeybees in this act. In fact, I even reached out to the provincial apiculturalist or provincial beekeeper prior to this talk, and I said, "Can you confirm for me that there is no issues with killing these?" And that is very true. We don't encourage it. There's often much better ways we can deal with problem honeybees, and by calling beekeepers and getting them to come take them. Often beekeepers will come take them, but you can euthanize these things. So I want to point out honeybees. So honeybees so how the honeybee colony naturally reproduces is that they'll swarm. So honeybees leave the colony with a queen and they swarm, and then they kind of have their new colony. They're ready to go, and this is what a swarm looks like. You'll see them on the outside. They're all buzzing around. They're in a big group. They'll send scouts out to look for places where they can nest. So often they'll find empty beehives or cavities like this tree cavity on the left. So this is a swarm, and on the left we see a bees nesting in a tree. Now, the swarm is only going to stay for like half a day or a few hours, and then they'll be gone. So if you see a swarm, call a beekeeper. They will be on this like crazy. They'll be all over this because that's really easy taking for them. If the bees are in a tree or a cavity like this, it's harder for them to access them, but they might still be interested in coming out and taking them because these bees are valuable to beekeepers. So something to think about. So addressing problem honeybees. So what we recommend, so honeybees can be defensive of their colony and they can pose a public safety risk. So there's a large number of bees in one of these colonies, one of these nests, 40,000 easy, right? And they can cause structural problems in buildings. So what we recommend first and foremost is call a swarm catcher. If you scan this QR code, it'll take you to the Alberta Beekeeping Commission website that will list for you the different regions and the swarm catchers in those regions. And hopefully one of them will come help you. And if not, the next step will be, potentially euthanizing them. So we'll talk about that in a second. I know it's 11:30, Paige. I will try to wrap up really quickly. So the first thing, if somebody calls you about bees, the first thing you need to do is figure out what kind of bees you're dealing with. So are you dealing with solitary bees, like these leafcutter bees or ground nesting bees or like the loose strife bee? If you are, there's almost never, we get very few calls about people worried about these things, worried about public safety, because it's not really a public safety issue. Many of these bees don't even have strong enough stingers to penetrate your skin. These are almost a non-issue. So you're unlikely to get questions about these, but almost always recommend just living with them. They're really not going to cause problems. Next up is bumblebees. Bumblebees live in these nests, like you can see here. And bumblebees, we always recommend people to try and live with them. They have an annual life cycle. They'll die off in the fall. You can seal up the nest entrance in the fall. And then hopefully they won't come back. So try to live with them as much as you can. If you have someone that's anaphylactic to bees, you might want to euthanize them. We can't have people dying, so these are considerations we want to factor in. Bumblebees are not going to be a structural issue in your home. They might get into your insulation. They're not going to cause mold problems. There's just so few of them. It's not a big deal. Honeybees, we're going to have to deal with them. If you have a swarm, call a swarm catcher right away. Beekeepers will be so happy to get that call. They'll go get them. If you're dealing with honeybees that have nested somewhere, that's going to be harder to deal with. But, if they're nesting in your home, something you're going to want to address. So we are here to help. So if you have been called out to deal with some bees, get photos of them, get good photos, close-up photos that are in focus, send them to us. You can text them to, I give you my number, send them to that email address. We're pretty good about responding. We'll tell you what kind of bees you're dealing with and give you some advice. Again, I won't really even go into this, but addressing problem bees, the majority of bees that we have in Alberta are solitary. There's over 300 species. Always encourage the homeowner to live with them. They are extremely docile, very, very low risk, almost impossible to relocate. Try to live with them as they are. You'll get very few calls for these. Addressing the bumblebees, if you have problem bumblebees in a home, again, encourage the homeowner to live with them. They will be there until fall. And they might the colony will grow until like late August, and then you'll see that the numbers dying off. Often, as soon as you tell people that colony is going to die off in the fall, they're happy. But occasionally we still have people that still want someone to come take them away. You might ask, do we relocate nests? Well, the answer to that is no, because it can take us an entire day to get into someone's, remove the siding off a house, go in, pull out the bee colony, and then relocate it. We've damaged the house. There's liability. Takes a ton of our time. We're biologists. We're not construction, we have no expertise in that. And 100% of the relocations that I've personally done have resulted in death of the colony. So we don't relocate bees. Try to live with them or call an exterminator, sadly, is kind of where we're at with that. There are species at risk considerations, but very unlikely that you're going to be dealing with those bees. They're very easy to identify. We can help you identify them. And a side note, the bumblebee species at risk that we have, the two species, nest in the ground. So you're very unlikely to find them in a house. And for the most part, bumblebees can be euthanized, but as an absolute last resort. Again, honeybees, they are a single species for the most part. They are a managed livestock species. Call a swarm catcher. In a lot of cases, beekeepers are going to be happy to get your call. There are no species at risk considerations here. And these can be a public safety issue and a structural issue for buildings. So we need to deal with them. Again, euthanization should never be the first thing that we think to do here. It's about educating those homeowners about the options. And then as a last resort, it is an option. Certainly, it is always an option for honeybees. There are no prohibitions on that anywhere. So when we talk about these bees, again, these solitary bees, these super fun, docile, that's a little solitary bee on my thumb. They are very low risk to people and infrastructure. Bumblebees can be a bit of a public safety risk if you have someone who's severely allergic, but generally very docile, not a big deal. Honeybees, you want to get those bees out of your home for sure. So honeybees almost always have to be removed and at a worst case scenario, euthanized. And with our native bees, it's about educating those homeowners about life cycles of those bees, the actual risk associated with them. We encourage them to live with them and then seal up those nests when the nest is inactive. And finally, I know I kind of reiterated some of this a long time. I need to maybe reorganize this a bit, but to sum up, there's 371 native bee species, 375 bee species in total in Alberta. Only 3 of them are effectively protected, and then only in very, very, very few circumstances. And it's very technical as we got into, but the chances of you coming across one of those bee species at risk from a homeowner who has called you to get rid of bees is very, 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 very low. And if you're unsure, send us a photo of those bees and we can tell you. Honeybees are non-native livestock. They are not endangered or protected. And euthanization of problem bees is almost always is an option, but it should be a last resort. Again, as with anything, right? If you want to learn more, the Alberta Native Bee Council has loads of information on their website. Check out those QR codes. They'll take you directly to those resources, but they'll take you to our website. Poke around. There's so much to learn in the bee world. These are fascinating critters, and we are here to help. Again, I want to reiterate, we do not relocate nests, but we can help you kind of figure out what you're dealing with and provide advice. Contact information is on the screen there, and Paige, it's 11:36. So I did use those 5 minutes, but I didn't catch us up, but I didn't go over too bad. So I don't know if there's time for questions. I can maybe try to answer the ones in the Q&A. But it's up to you. You're the boss.
That works great. Let's launch your poll though. We'll get that going because we have 2 questions for you. So that should come up on your guys' screen. 2 questions again. So scroll if you can't see them at the bottom there.
These are hard questions, guys. They're hard. Yeah. I put 4 on there. That was probably too much. Just answer a couple. If you answer a couple of these, we'll call that good.
Oh, 4 questions. I lied. Okay.
I know. I got overly excited, obviously.
Not a problem. You need an award for speed talking.
Well, I'm pretty good. Like I appreciate, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I can absolutely post. Yeah. That's perfect. Thanks. You guys are right on top of this. Yeah. And like I say, we're here to help. We do have a full-time staff member now. We have a bit more resources. And if you're unsure, and you can get a photo, we can give you advice on what to do there. We know we get the calls too. And so I was so excited to get this opportunity to chat with everyone today about, what are the facts? Like, what can we do? What are the options, right? And there are definitely options here. So, yeah.
Awesome. I've got 72% have participated. So you guys have another minute here to get your answers in.
Oh, and I love Mark said in the cost. Sorry, just take right over. But Mark said they charge more to deter people from having them euthanize them. I love that. Give them the option, but charge them more. Absolutely. Like that should be the last. And certainly, if you have a child that has an anaphylactic response to bees, I go kill that bumblebee nest. That is not worth risking your child's life. And they're probably willing to pay the extra money to have that happen, right? I think that's win-win. Absolutely. So yeah.
Okay, we're at 80% participated, so another 20 seconds here, guys. If the poll hasn't come up on your screen, maybe just minimize this one and check on another screen or behind it. They pop up randomly.
And then on another side note too, I just can't help myself, but like when I was preparing this presentation, I was thinking it might be helpful for us to like put together a fact sheet for the pest control industry on the information that we talked about today, like which bees are protected, when and where, what do they look like, who do we call to confirm, and that sort of thing. So that's something that we can absolutely work on, and we can also share yeah, other information, is needed. So legislation, Tanya, legislation is never boring. Okay, I like it. That's great. Yes. Yeah.
All right, 86% have participated. I'm going to close the poll now and share the results. Megan, if you want to take over and go through those there.
Okay. I'll answer do you want me to answer these on type the answers?
Well, just the questions for the poll. I think the Q&A
Oh.
you can answer separately after we get Corinne on.
Perfect. Okay. So number one is how many bee species are in Alberta? You guys did amazing. You were listening. 375. That's really, really good. Honeybees are an endangered species. So we had a 25-75 split here. So 75% of you said false, which is true. Honeybees are not an endangered species. They are a livestock species, and that's really, really important to remember because they can be a pest species, right? So honeybees are not an endangered species. How many Alberta bee species are protected under Species of Risk Act? 3. You got that right as well. 89% of you got that. Where are those bee species protected? 72% of you answered correctly. Those 3 bee species under the Federal Species at Risk Act are protected on federal land and or where critical habitat has been delineated under an approved recovery strategy. That's a mouthful. And that is it.
Awesome. All right. Yeah, if you could just jump on the Q&A and answer those, and then we will get started with Corinne's talk. So Corinne is a seasoned professional in the quality assurance department at the Able Pest Control. Where are we here? She has nearly 2 decades of experience in this role, and she's been with Able Pest Control for over 20 years, including 8 years as a service technician and 12 years in the quality assurance department. So she currently supports Able's branches in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, where she holds applicator licenses and is a licensed fumigator with over a decade of practical fumigation experience. So Corinne, if you want to turn on your mic and video, we can load up your presentation and get on with the final talk of the day.
All right. Is the presentation up okay?
I can't see it on my screen.
Oh. Two-step process. All right.
Things are loading. I see it now. Looks good.
Okay. So, good morning, everyone. We're going to talk about treating cockroaches in multi-unit dwellings, such as apartment buildings, although the information provided can be applied to any cockroach job. I really had to narrow it down today because there's a lot that we could talk about with regards to treating cockroaches. So I've kind of cut out a lot of the life cycle and all that stuff. So we all know cockroaches are good at hiding and they breed incredibly fast. And we know that apartment buildings can pose unique challenges that sometimes make their control even more difficult. So in this presentation, we'll discuss how to locate and treat cockroaches strategically, and we'll discuss some of the benefits that each type of application, and of course, we'll discuss some of those challenges and how to overcome them as well. I'd like to start off just by reviewing some cockroach behavior. Knowing how a cockroach behaves will help us locate their harbor sites and ultimately give us the best chance of eliminating the problem. It's important to eliminate as much harborage as possible in order to have success in controlling cockroach populations. All cockroaches are fond of warm, humid environments, and because of this habitat preference, they're commonly found in kitchens and washrooms where food, and to a greater extent water, are abundant. German cockroaches also prefer wooden surfaces over metal surfaces. So just something to keep your eyes open for those types of surfaces, as it's able to hold the heat and moisture better, and it's more ideal for cockroaches. Now, when it comes to foraging, different life stages tend to have different foraging ranges and eating habits. Subadult nymphs, they usually travel the furthest in search of new and unexploited harborages. And then after that, you have the adult males, and then the unfertilized females. Young nymphs and gravid females, those are the females that are carrying the eggs, they tend to stay the closest to their harborage site. And the gravid females also tend to forage and feed the least. Now, cockroaches are generalists when it comes to food. If they can extract nutrition from it, they will likely consume it. Cockroaches tend to be active at night, although this behavior will shift in an area that is heavily infested. Cockroaches are mainly nocturnal to avoid predation. But if a population is too large, some roaches won't have any hiding spots and they'll remain active during the day to avoid getting caught. Additionally, if an area is vacant for a long stretch of time, then the population at some point may recognize that there is no need to be nocturnal, as the risk of predation is no longer present. The most important bit of knowledge about the common cockroach behavior is perhaps that they exhibit what's known as positive thigmotaxis. And this means that they will seek contact with other objects. They prefer the security of tight spaces. Much like their nocturnal behavior, this desire for a tight crevice has been evolved for protection. An exposed cockroach is obviously a cockroach in danger, and the more protected the space, the safer they feel. So you can see in the image on the top right that the cockroach is safely nestled into its hiding space. It has its antennae sticking out, and this is an ideal position for a cockroach at rest, because their body is protected, but their antennae are free to assess the outside world. Cockroaches use their antennae to smell, and that's exactly what this roach is doing. It's laying in wait, smelling the air, and determining if anything of interest has come into its foraging range. If it has, the roach will likely go exploring this new scent come the nightfall. Although cockroaches tend to live together in tight quarters, they are not a social insect, but rather they are gregarious, meaning that they like each other's company. They're not social because they don't have hierarchies, they don't cooperate, and they're not caring for young. So why do we tend to find them huddled up together? Well, there's two reasons. One is that they have a common idea of what is good harborage. So a good location to one cockroach is a good location to another. But more importantly, they do this because cockroaches communicate through scents in their fecal matter. Cockroaches convey a lot of information in their droppings, and the one that brings them together is their aggregation pheromones. This is why if you find a popular roach harborage, it will be covered with fecal matter. And to the roaches, this is a bulletin board of what everyone's eating, who's getting ready to breed and who's done breeding, and even who just wants to be left alone. Now that we've reviewed how cockroaches behave, this will help us determine what signs to look for, indicating the presence of cockroaches. Aside from actually observing the cockroach, there are other significant signs to indicate their presence. Obviously, if you find cockroaches clustered together, you've probably found a pocket or a harborage area. But they also leave other clues to their presence as well. They'll leave skin casings, egg cases, and more importantly, their droppings. Their droppings look like a smattering of coffee grounds stuck to the surface, and those droppings will tell you that roaches are frequenting an area and using it for communication. If you find droppings, at the very least, you found a pocket, and the more droppings you find, the more active that harborage site is. Okay. So let's say you get called in to treat for roaches, you arrive at the door, you've got all your gear, you greet the client, then what? First and foremost, ask the client where they're seeing the activity. They know the best. They see the roaches in their unit, and they will be the best person to show you where they're finding them. Typically, this will be in the kitchen and maybe the bathroom. However, in some instances, it can also be in the bedrooms. This is particularly true if you're dealing with a heavy infestation. And I'll be the first to, and not the last to tell you that I've seen roaches in areas where you just wouldn't expect to find them. You know, I've seen them in furniture. I've seen them in bedrooms. They'll go wherever they need to go. When you arrive, use the information from your client to start your inspection, but don't just limit your inspection to those areas. The sightings are just a guide to help you with a starting point. As a pest control professional, you still have to check all the common areas. Just because they haven't been sighted there doesn't mean that they're not there. After talking to the client, the first step in all pest control is that you need to do an inspection. You're going to look for those roach hiding places and place out insect monitors to help you find the harborages that you may not see. When deploying insect monitors, feel free to place monitors in common harborage areas to help with your inspection. And remember to place monitors in areas that would make sense and provide the appropriate conditions that German roaches prefer. Also remember, you can't just monitor one possible harborage. To monitor properly, you need to account for all the possible harborages. So a monitor behind a fridge won't cut it. You'll need one under the sink, by the dishwasher, behind the toilet as well. The more monitors you have, the less likely you are to get blindsided by these pests, which in turn makes both your life and your clients much less stressful. So this map will just help to illustrate where to begin your search for harborage sites and where to set out your insect monitors. Our homes offer stable climates, abundant food and water sources, dark and warm areas, and countless cracks and crevices for hiding. Basically, a cockroach paradise. Additionally, you know, we often eliminate their natural predators like rodents and spiders, which creates ideal environments for these cockroaches. Displayed on the screen is just a rough inspection map that highlights various areas of a home or an apartment unit, each representing unique microclimates. Common to all of these locations is darkness, which with many also offering access to water and heat. Areas that don't provide direct resources are still often situated near them. So the red areas, these are the most favorable to cockroaches. Typically, they combine darkness, warmth, water, and access to food, everything that a cockroach needs. The yellow areas, they may provide warmth and water, but might lack easy access to food. And then the green areas, these are dark and cater to the cockroach's thigmotactic behavior, but lack the warmth and the resources. Roaches are usually found in these areas only when dealing with a massive population or one that has been heavily treated with pesticides, forcing them to relocate. So when you arrive at your call, you should always have a few things on hand. First and foremost, I'm going to mention a vacuum. If you don't have a vacuum, you're already starting off on the wrong foot. You should vacuum up every roach that you can, because of course, every one that you catch is one less to deal with. A vacuum is a really beneficial tool for quickly reducing cockroach populations. Just remember that vacuum should be fitted with a HEPA filter, because this will help to prevent the release of allergens into the air. And you're going to start by vacuuming typical harborage areas, cracks and crevices to remove all life stages. You should also have glue boards on hand, ideally insect monitors. They're small, they're easy to carry, and they're relatively cheap. And they also come with the added benefit of having a small sticky strip on the back, which allows you to adhere them to vertical surfaces and along pipes. I always advise to be liberal with your glue boards, because they not only help you monitor, but they can also help reduce the population. And then lastly, you want your pesticides, and this would include your baits, your dusts, and your sprays. So now that you have done the groundwork and you found the harborage, you know where it's at, it's time to treat. So what is the best way to treat? When it comes to German cockroaches, we really need to be mindful about how we're treating and with what. There's a time and a place for any product that we have access to, but before you start, doling out your chemicals, you really need to work on crashing that population first. And of course, the easiest way to do this is to grab your vacuum. You're going to hear me mention the vacuum quite a bit. If you found that primary harborage, start sucking them up. And by doing this, you'll drop the numbers fast and limit the number of roaches that might escape to a new hiding space. And to be honest, it's really satisfying sucking up those roaches. We do the same with bed bugs, and it's just such a great feeling to see that big pocket get sucked up and disappear forever. I just want to mention that, if you use an aerosol before initially crashing the population, you can actually cause the cockroaches to run and scatter, and this will result in, a bigger problem than you began with as they scatter to escape that spray. So after you've completed your physical control, it's time to jump into your pesticide application. Remember that you want all your applications as close to the harborage as possible. You don't want to waste your time doing a crack and crevice on baseboards, in the living room, if all the activity is around the fridge in the kitchen. And remember that baits and sprays don't mix. Applying them both will just build bait aversion, and it's also a pointless endeavor. There's one exception to this, and that's Cyclera, and I'm sure most of you have heard of the Cyclera products. The Cyclera spray and the baits can be used together because they're non-repellent. They're actually pretty good products, and it's good to have them as a part of your tools. As a general rule, we want to aim for baiting first. Bait is easier to control. It's less likely to contaminate non-target surfaces. It's far less toxic to humans, and it acts as an attractant rather than a repellent. And overall, it's very effective when applied properly. So the most commonly used gel baits are Max Force or Cyclera. Sometimes Greenway is used, and there's a few others out there, but these are the most commonly used. Baiting around droppings is the fastest way to get bait uptake, and it's the best way to get the maximum number of roaches. If you place bait in an area that's covered in cockroach droppings, it'll tell other roaches coming by that this food must be pretty safe because everyone's hanging around it. That being said, if you don't find any evidence of activity in an area, don't just apply bait for no reason. If you look under a sink and there's no evidence of cockroaches, instead of dropping, blobs of bait here and there, they'll likely go to waste. Drop an insect monitor instead. An insect monitor will not only catch some of the cockroaches in that area, but it'll actually tell you if an area is active, even if you can't find any signs at the time of your inspection. When you return for the follow-up and you find that there are roaches in your monitor, pay attention to which side they're captured on. That will give you clues about where to look more closely and where to actually put your bait. The same thing applies if you open a cupboard but you don't see any signs. Don't go dropping bait on the hinges if there's no evidence that tells you to do so. More than likely, if there's no droppings, the roaches aren't in that area, or at least not often enough to justify baiting there. Smaller cockroaches need smaller dabs of bait. Anything about the size of a pea is probably sufficient. The early instar cockroaches are too small to feed on even gel baits. And as such, they get a lot of their nutrition from adult fecal matter. And lucky for us, the baits are still toxic even after they're excreted, meaning that nymphs feeding on adult frass will succumb to the bait treatment. As pest control technicians, our job first and foremost is to locate the pest and its living area and then treat accordingly. If you just treat without locating that harborage or those hiding spots, you're likely not going to get success because you're not thinking about the actual pest, you're just thinking about the application. So just remember, don't apply your products just for the sake of it. It's a waste of time and a waste of product. So use that time instead to really look and do a good inspection and treat only when it makes sense. Now, although it shouldn't be your go-to, your first go-to, spraying is an effective way is also an effective way to control roaches, especially if you found small pockets of infestations. Many sprays do have a tendency to push cockroaches around, so you'll want to be cautious with their usage, especially if you're doing a multi-unit building. As a rule, I personally like to keep baits and dusts close to the epicenter of the infestation while placing residual barriers along the outer perimeter to ensure that there's no relocation. Properly placed baits and dusts will keep roaches in, while the barrier keeps them away from new locations, thereby containing the infestation and making it much easier to solve. Next up, we have dusts. Dusts are excellent for long-term residual control. They don't break down very quickly, and they can be applied to cracks and crevices and wall voids. They can occasionally be placed in voids behind us or beneath appliances. Dusts are also handy because they can be carried into the harborage for additional control. Insects will succumb to dust by contact or ingestion through grooming, and cockroaches groom a lot. Because their antennae are needed for so much of their sensory perception, if the antennae become dirty or damaged, they have a much harder time navigating their world. In turn, they spend a lot of time grooming, which again is a behavior that we can take advantage of. So just a quick recap of everything, and then I'll tell you how we can apply this knowledge to treating multi-unit dwellings. So roaches communicate primarily through smells, and because of this, they like to be around each other. They're gregarious. This gregarious nature causes them to make collective decisions, meaning that they will favor areas and foods that other roaches have already been contacting. And this is why we want to bait as close to the primary harborage as possible. Cockroaches are nocturnal and thigmotactic, meaning that they like dark and they like tight spaces. We need to be mindful of this when inspecting for them. Cockroach life stages can give us clues to how close we are to the main harborage. Gravid females and young nymphs are a good indication the primary harborage is nearby. And because of this, you need to be monitoring, especially if you're having trouble finding the harborage. If you look in all the key areas and you don't find any activity, drop a monitor in each spot. Roaches are small and they leave small clues, which means they can sometimes be overlooked. Place a monitor so the next time when you're in to inspect, you can confirm whether or not an area is active. When treating, use your tools in a way that keeps you in control of the cockroach movement. When you locate an infestation, vacuum them up, then apply your baits to those areas and keep them contained. Use pesticides with repellent properties on the outer edges of the infestation to keep them away from new locations. All the tools in your belt have a use, but proper application is key to fast and lasting control. Planning is crucial. Randomly applying pesticides is ineffective for long-term results. Clients must also disclose any pesticides that they've been using on their own. Many household sprays are repellent, which can drive cockroaches into unusual hiding spots like bedrooms, picture frames, or electronics, which can complicate our treatments. Understanding prior pesticide use can help refine your inspection and control strategy. Adapt your approach based on the roach's behavior and always consider how external factors like client actions can impact your plan. And lastly, as I said, client cooperation is important and necessary. Don't judge them, educate them. Pest control is a partnership, and any good partnership requires cooperation and honesty. Okay, so apartment units, they do pose some unique challenges. Clients can occasionally face challenges with cleanliness, mobility, and even honesty. Sometimes prep work is only half done or not done at all. Sometimes clients can't leave while you do your treatment. And sometimes clients will lie to you about whether or not they have had any issues. And despite this, we can always do something. So if you go into a call and the area is not prepped, don't use it as an excuse to just walk away. Just because the cupboard wasn't cleaned out doesn't mean you can't get in there to inspect, monitor, and bait. And it doesn't mean that you can't vacuum something up. What it does do, however, is void a warranty. But you should still try and do something. Is the unit a mess? Well, inspect, monitor, and bait where you can. Can the client not leave? That just means you can't really spray. If the client says they're adamant that they don't have anything, do an inspection anyway, just to confirm. And if you don't see anything, place out some monitors, because it never hurts, just to confirm. If you do run into preparation challenges, make sure that you document the issue. These reports go to the property managers, and they need to know if one of their tenants is unwilling or unable to prep the unit themselves. In the past, I've helped to treat multiple apartment buildings. We did, and when we do those apartment buildings, we always do a full building inspection and inspect each unit. One of the things that property managers often ask, and in one of these cases, they asked us to do a quick assessment of sanitation concerns, even if there weren't any insect sightings at the time of the inspection. Units in disarray negatively affect the units around them, and property managers need to know this information to help them decide how to assist, or in some cases, they may need to evict a tenant. So when you go in to treat and the unit is unprepped, make sure that you say what you found. It could be as simple as cupboards not emptied, but it could be something bigger, like unit is heavily cluttered, unable to move appliances, significant amount of dishes piled up on the counter and sink, garbage found in various rooms. Whatever the case may be, make sure that you document. Clutter and garbage or dirty dishes left out for days are supporting conditions, and while we can't necessarily control them, we can report them, which gives us something to defend ourselves with a unit that has chronic issues. If you were to get called back 5 times or more for cockroaches, and you say it's because the unit is a disaster, but you never took any notes during your reporting, this just makes it look more like an excuse rather than, the actual reason. So always make sure that you're recording what you're observing in these units. So I'm just going to go over a case study just to tie everything together. So a few years ago, our team was approached by an apartment company that was facing chronic cockroach issues in several of their buildings. It was 8 buildings, and there was 1,100 units. They had many years of unsuccessful cockroach control. There were ongoing sanitation concerns. Tenants were too embarrassed to admit that they had issues, and there was a heavily pesticide-resistant cockroach population. They had a pest control provider, but what they were doing wasn't working. And the last straw for this management company was when they spent $50,000 in 1 month to do a massive clean out that was ultimately unsuccessful. So right off the bat, we told them that we can take this on, but it's going to take a while, probably over a year. We knew that this was going to be a challenge, and we knew that we had to be smart and we had to be methodical. Before we did anything, we laid out a plan for them. So we began with a thorough bulk inspection. There were 8 technicians per building. We inspected every unit from top to bottom. We were able to gain access with keys if the tenants weren't home. During the inspection, we assessed the sanitation levels, asked tenants about insect sightings. We deployed monitors in key areas and inspected for activity using our knowledge of cockroach behavior. All findings were carefully documented. Each building was assigned a dedicated technician who visited weekly, starting with the most problematic units. And this is key. We implemented a strict no spraying policy at the start, and this was done for several reasons. The insects had already been sprayed heavily by the previous company. Many tenants were applying their own sprays, and most importantly, we didn't want to risk spreading the infestation further. The technicians carried only bait, monitors, and vacuums during their service visits. After each session, they emailed management with updated statistics and updated the list accordingly. There was open communication with the building managers that allowed us to respond quickly and to new sightings and update the schedule. Initially, the technicians treated about 25 units per day, but as conditions improved, this number dropped significantly. Eventually, many visits were limited to follow-up inspections. Given the size of the apartments and the transient population, achieving absolute eradication wasn't realistic. However, we did reach a point where any cockroach call was either a new issue or it was tied to a critical unit. And those with severe sanitation problems that were beyond our control. These core issues were addressed with building management. It took about 18 months to fully control the infestation. And today, the challenges are no greater than in any other typical apartment unit or apartment building. Severe infestations have been eliminated, and we built a strong partnership with our client. So the plan worked, but why did it work? From the start, we set clear expectations and took full control of the action plan. This was crucial. As you know, clients try to dictate the approach, but in this case, we stayed firm in our diagnosis and the solution paid off. We also did a full assessment of the building. We had no idea what we'd be walking into, but we needed to ensure that we had a complete understanding of the situation. This allowed us to work with building managers to address unsanitary units, either by cleaning or containing them. It also helped us explain why certain areas had persistent problems while others didn't. And over time, some of the technicians could actually predict the cockroach activity based on surrounding conditions. A key focus was preventing cockroach relocation. Knowing they were pesticide averse and potentially resistant, we concentrated on keeping them contained. And that's why we relied on baiting, vacuuming, monitoring, and then educating the tenants about using their own sprays. And this minimized the movement and disruption of the cockroaches. We were also patient in clearing units. We only declared them roach-free after a full month of no sightings. This approach prevented premature clearance and helped us identify units that were a constant source of reintroduction. When patterns emerged, such as repeated issues in certain units, our technicians dug deeper to determine if tenants were inadvertently bringing the roaches in. Another crucial factor was assigning dedicated technicians to each building. This consistency helped to build trust with tenants and the managers. It facilitated education and ensured accountability. These are key elements in tackling severe infestations. Most importantly, we didn't rush the process. We carefully developed and adjusted our plan of attack, considering the environments these roaches had adapted to over the years and leveraging that knowledge to our advantage. Ultimately, we got into the mindset of one of nature's most adaptable pests, and that insight allowed us to succeed. As with all pest control, the treatment of roaches in apartments should be done with some strategy. Long gone are the days of spraying and praying or splash and dash. It doesn't work. And often the cases often causes to things getting worse. At the very least, it's usually a waste of product. If you spray a location without reason, if you bait an area without reason, you're spraying and praying. Whenever you apply pesticide, ask yourself, why am I placing this here? If the answer is anything other than because I have good reason to believe pests are traveling or living here, you probably shouldn't apply it. Save yourself the time and only apply pesticides when you have reason to. And that concludes my presentation.
Awesome. That was great, Corinne. Thank you so much. I'll throw up your poll right now. Hopefully everyone can see that. If they can't, I would say minimize the screen again. There's 2 questions, so just scroll down to that bottom one, and we'll get those answers in, and then we can go through them. In the meantime, I have one question for you, Corinne, from the Q&A. What dust products do you find most effective?
There's a couple to choose from. If you want a bait dust, the Avert Dry Flowable is a good one to choose. Also, products like Boraticate or other boric acid-based dusts work really well. Cockroaches don't build up any kind of resistance to them. They're stomach poison. They would pick that up and ingest it through grooming. And it works really well if you apply it in the proper areas and they come into contact with it.
Okay. We have 75% participate in the poll, so if you haven't jumped on that yet, please answer those 2 questions. I can ask one more in the meantime. In regards to baiting in restaurants, we often find too much competition in food sanitation, liquid on surfaces, and wet areas. Any key suggestions other than fogging or big treatment applications?
Really, the key to a restaurant is finding those harborage places. I can't stress how important it is to make sure that you have lots of monitors placed out. Place them out in areas where, you would typically find them. I mean, restaurants, there's lots of areas where they could be. You really want to stick to those areas where there's a lot of moisture, and there's a lot of food available. And put out your monitors. The monitors will really tell you where the roaches are harboring. They're always going to be in a certain area, clustered together. And if you can find that and get your baits in there, that's really how you're going to end up tackling that problem.
Okay. Amazing. We have 85% participated, so I'll give 20 more seconds for people to jump on there. Let's try and reach 86. There's one more question in this chat here. American cockroaches can travel along the pipes in the walls of a building. German cockroaches can spread from unit to unit easily through cracks and crevices throughout a building like vents as well as walls. Maybe that wasn't quite a question as a statement, or...
I don't have a whole lot of experience with American cockroaches, but with regards to German cockroaches, yep, you're absolutely right. They can travel from unit to unit, especially when units have, hot water or the hot water radiant type heating. And so that's why it's really important to investigate all areas. So you can focus on the units, put on your monitors where you think they might be traveling, get dust in those wall voids. And also look at other areas like the garbage chutes. Take a look at the utility rooms, the boiler room, the garbage rooms, and focus some of your treatment there as well, and your monitoring.
Okay. I will end the poll right now. We have 87% participated, so I'll share those results if you just want to quickly go through those questions, Corinne.
So what is positive thigmotaxis? You might think it is a preference to take a taxi, but it's actually the preference for tight spaces. Cockroaches like that secure feeling of something on the top of their body and the bottom of their body. What is the best way to crash a cockroach population? And that's right, to vacuum up as many cockroaches as possible. I've done this many times, and it's a great way to just remove cockroaches and prevent them from running all over the place. I have lots of stories to tell for another time.
We'll have to get those through email. So if you want to throw your email in the chat, people can connect with you there. I didn't see it at the end on your last slide. But we'll close out the workshop. Thank you guys all for staying a little bit longer than we had planned. Thank you to our esteemed lineup of speakers. Wow, we got lucky with this, and I think it was a great little workshop here. And thanks to you guys for all attending. Again, if you're a pesticide applicator, please don't forget to complete the follow-up survey at the end of the webinar. There should be one that comes up. And just a reminder, we recorded this, so we'll be posting it to our YouTube channel as well as the resources tab on our website. Those links were in the chat there, and if not, you can find it on our website there. Hopefully we'll see you all in person at our pre-conference workshop and our annual conference at the beginning of March there. There's some links on the screen for anyone that's interested in that. Again, thank you so much, and we will end the webinar now. Cheers, guys.